Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have just shy of 3 hours of ghost stories. I hope you all enjoy them. It's mostly a compilation from the best of this summer. My first video back is actually on the 16th, so I'm really excited to record some new stories for you all. For those of you that don't know, I stream on this channel almost every single night. We usually stream Dead by Daylight, but sometimes we stream some other stuff as well, so if you would like to check out the streams, be sure to put on the notifications so that you don't miss them. I also have a second channel that I will have linked down in the description if you would like to check it out, where I upload a lot of the highlights. Yeah, with all of that out of the way, I hope you all enjoy the stories. Be sure to drop a like rating if you do. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. This is kinda long, so bear with me. I bought my first house in November 2019. As a kid who grew up dirt poor, obviously this was a huge accomplishment for myself and my family. We moved in, and for the first few months, it was our quiet little suburban house with a decent yard, and it was our slice of the American dream. At the start of the pandemic, I was furloughed from my job, so I was home for about a month. That's when my first experiences with sleep paralysis began. My girlfriend would typically be up an hour before me to take our daughter to daycare. I'd wake up, kiss them goodbye, and lay back down until my alarm went off. When I woke up one morning, I couldn't move. I almost could wiggle my fingers a little and move my eyes, but that was it. That's when I saw a little girl standing at the bottom of my bed out of the corners of my eyes. It looked like my daughter. Even stood like she does, but the voice it had was warped and deeper somehow. It kept saying Dada over and over again. Each time the voice got deeper, it almost seemed desperate for acknowledgement. I managed to break free of the paralysis and quickly sat up. She was gone. I kept telling myself it was just a dream, but the logical part of my brain knew better. Nothing else like that happened again until about a year later. Around Christmas of 2020, we always get a live tree instead of a fake tree at my girlfriend's insistence. It's a long-standing tradition in her family, and I'm vastly outnumbered if I choose to argue against it. I just hate vacuuming up those fucking needles. I digress. The night after we set up and decorated the tree, I got up to grab some water from the fridge. My kitchen is separated from the living room with a wall about 4 feet high with a support pillar on the right side. I open the fridge, grab a bottle of water, and close the door. As I turned to face the living room, that's when I saw her. A slumped over figure of an older woman who was swaying back and forth. The swaying movements were rigid and almost mechanical. It looked like my mother, who had been passed away over a year ago at this point. Who or what was this thing, and why was it here all of a sudden? Despite me telling myself to run down the hallway and lock the bedroom door, part of me had to know if this was real. I've had vivid dreams after one too many edibles, but this wasn't like that. As I rounded the corner pillar, I came around the corner and the figure was gone. Nothing. I stood in my living room looking around and trying to get my breathing under control. Cold terror had engulfed me at that point, and I almost ran into my bedroom with a distinct certainty that I'd look back and find this thing running after me. The next morning I told my girlfriend about it, and she immediately blamed the edibles. I thought she may be right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that that wasn't it. She has never experienced anything and is a staunch denier of the paranormal, so I knew trying to convince her this was real was a battle I had already lost. A few days later, my girlfriend had already left for work, but I was watching my daughter for the day. She normally gets up around 7:30, so I got myself up to shower at 6:45. As I'm drying off, I catch a figure walking down my hallway towards my daughter's room out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was my girlfriend and shrugged it off, but then I realized that she'd been gone for almost an hour at that point. She kissed me goodbye like she always does before leaving. Panic gripped me like it never had before, and I ran to my daughter's room. I stopped at the door and heard her saying hi to her mommy. I opened the door and flipped on her light to find my daughter still wrapped in her blanket sitting up. "Good morning, baby," I said with a thin smile. "Good morning, Daddy. Where'd Mommy go? What's wrong with her eyes?" Terrified but still trying to keep my composure, I said, "Well, Mommy went to work before we woke up. She kissed me and you goodbye and she left. Why do you think something was wrong with her eyes?" My 3-year-old scrunches her face, and what she said next still freezes my blood when I think about it. Shaking her head, she says, No, Daddy, Mommy was just here, but her eyes were gone." I said nothing, and as calmly as I could, I got her out of bed and to the other side of the house. What the fuck is this thing, and why is it just showing up now? I called my girlfriend and work a few hours later and talked to her about what had just happened. I put my little girl on the phone so she could tell her mother that I wasn't lying and asked her if her eyes were okay. Mostly silent and very apprehensive, she agreed that I should call a priest if it made me feel better. The next morning, I called my local Catholic church because I'm no Darren, and asked if the parish priest could come and bless my home. I'm baptized Catholic and I'm very lapsed in practice, but I told the rectory secretary what was going on, and she immediately put me in touch with a priest outside of the particular parish who is known to deal with disturbances like mine or worse. When he arrived, we talked more in depth about the things that had happened and how they started. Without any prompting, we walked to my daughter's room and threw holy water into the corner where her bed was. The priest told me that whatever the entity was, the way it was presenting itself was not only predatory, but likely demonic in nature. He added that doppelganger type phenomena, not always, but sometimes used by a demonic spirit to attempt to possess someone by withering down their ability to discern reality. I nodded in silent terror and didn't want to tell him that I felt like I could shit out my heart and die at that point. Since then, I haven't felt anything or seen anything out of the ordinary, and the house just feels more vibrant and lively. I still feel like I'm being watched sometimes, but chalk that up to paranoia to keep my sanity. I should start by saying that while I do believe in ghosts and the paranormal, I believe there are plenty of things that can be explained once you take a step back and think with a clear mind. With that being said, there's no logical explanation that I can think of for this story. This story takes place at my old job, which is a restaurant/bar/event hall on a military base. I was there for 8 years, starting off as a dishwasher and made my way up to an admin. The building was originally built like in the 80s, but they built on from it, to the point it's hilariously noticeable from the inside if you know what you're looking at. Now, over those 8 years, we've had plenty of employees and customers talk about how weird things happen in the old part of the building, but nothing too crazy. Like things moving slightly on their own that made you think that maybe the AC was hitting it, or feeling like someone was right behind you with how steps sounded. I've had smaller moments like that during my time there. Nothing too crazy. Though before this incident, I thought it was just in my head or something else. I realized very intensely that I was wrong one day. It was stupid early in the morning, going in at like 4, and I was in the building alone. It was the end of the month, so it was inventory time. We also had a delivery coming in at around 6, though they have been known to show up earlier. I started inventory the day before, but my manager and I figured that I could come in early, finish up inventory, put up the image, and I could go home early. That was a deal to me because it was Tuesday. I was off Wednesday, and Thursday and Friday were holidays, so we were closed. I had all the doors open from where we stored the liquor. The old side of the building, all the way to the loading dock, on the other side of the building in the newer half. I did this so, should the driver arrive early, he would be able to find his way to me. It takes roughly less than 2 minutes to walk from the loading dock to the liquor room, if you walk at casual pace with all the turns you take to move around. I had my music blaring inside the liquor room, which was a freezer room they used in the old building, which echoed inside the room. As I was counting, I heard a man's voice clearly say, "Hello?" I had been there for roughly an hour, so I thought it was the delivery truck driver who was looking for me. I answered back and walked out looking for the driver. Except when I searched around, not only was there no delivery truck, I was still the only person there. Now you would be thinking that it must have been the music I listened to, but I was listening to some game's instrumental soundtrack, so that couldn't be it. Shaking my head, thinking I was hearing things, I just went back to count. What happened next was the first time I experienced this sense of primal fear. The room got real cold, even in the thick jacket I wore, and I was filled with a feeling of unease. Suddenly the sound of boots stomping down hard in the wooden floor came from down the hall and came towards me. It was at this fast walking pace and with a sense of purpose. I made some sort of noise as I just ducked deeper into the room, pressing against a wall. I raised a leg up and covered up my upper body with my arms as if that would do something, as those footsteps reached the door of the room and stopped. It was still cold, but once I saw that nothing was there, I bolted out the room and to my car, waiting for the next person to show up. Eventually the manager showed up and I tell her the story. She knew that I was pretty hard to startle, even with employees sneaking up on me, so when she saw the fear I had, she believed me. Plus, side is that after that, no one was allowed to be in the building alone during early morning or late morning. Cut to my 7th year there, and the newest manager coming in. We go to the old side of the building, talking about a bunch of things with another coworker. In the middle of the talk, she stops, looks off to the side and says, "This building's haunted, isn't it?" No one told her a thing about the ghosts of the weird things that happened there. Needless to say, I'm glad I'm not in that building anymore.
Okay, this isn't very scary or eventful, and it may not even belong here, but I think it's interesting enough to share. And it's kind of sweet in a weird way. To start off, I come from a spiritual family. My grandma, dad, aunts, and uncles and older cousins have a ton of stories. Thankfully, I didn't inherit too much of it, as I believe in spirits but never had an experience seeing one. Or at least knowing I saw one for sure. I do get feelings about places, and I can tell whether a place is safe or not for me. So my partner, now husband, let's call him Jay, and I lived in a really large 2-bedroom, 1.5 bathroom apartment on the top, 2nd floor of a complex during our last years of college, and we stayed there after we both graduated. It was nice, just old but not at all creepy. We moved in with our 1 to 2-year-old dog. We'll call him G. He's a larger than normal Italian greyhound if you want to picture him. Like a small whippet, I guess. A nice quiet dog. I worked most weeknights as a new construction manager. He was an intern turned employee, and he would leave after dinner and be home around 5 or 6 a.m., leaving me and the dog by ourselves. G wasn't allowed to sleep in our bed, so whenever Jay was gone for work, we'd have a sleepover on our futon in the living room, and we'd watch a movie or show and fall asleep together. I wasn't lucky enough to get a 9-to-5 job straight after college, so staying up late was the usual. I would use the sleep timer on the TV often here. Well, one night, long after the TV had turned itself off, I woke up suddenly to my dog growling. Not a loud growl, just very soft, almost like a whisper growl. My eyes had to adjust to the darkness, but eventually, I was able to see a silhouette of G on the other side of the coffee table, growling towards me. I tried to get him to stop and come back to me, but he wouldn't listen. And that's pretty much when I realized someone else was in the house, and I said to myself, "It's behind me, isn't it?" Our futon wasn't up against the wall. I had a large desk and a computer back there, so if something or someone was there, they could fit. I turned the TV back on for light and got the courage to peek behind the couch. Nothing. I got mad at the dog for freaking out for nothing and told him to come back to bed, and he finally listened. I left the TV on for the rest of the night and tried to fall back asleep. I didn't think much of it because I never felt anything in that house. But then this would happen at least once a month, in the same exact way, up until Jay stopped working nights. I felt safer in the living room with the TV on and the dog, so I kept doing it. It didn't occur to me until I shared my experiences with a friend that perhaps G did this every night, and that I only noticed when he growled maybe a little too loud, waking me up. That he was protecting me, us even, from whatever was there every night, and tried not to wake me up in doing so, hence the quiet growling. We've since moved, and G doesn't ever growl at anything except maybe his little brother who we adopted later. G is not a brave dog in a sense. I mean, Italian greyhounds are shy and bashful, so it was definitely strange behavior from him. But I still like to think he protected me all those times like a very good boy. Like a son. I know it's not very scary or eventful, so if you've made it this far, thanks for reading. If you've had similar experiences, I'd love to hear them.
When I was 23, I used to run the youth theater at a local theater royale. It was an old building from the Georgian period, at least Baroque, 1700s, etc. It was beautiful, dark green and red with great facades and that lovely musty theater smell. I could spend all my time there happily, but I hated being there alone, which I often was to prepare shows or set up for my session. There's a lot of prep that goes into a show. I had a key so I could let myself in, and if no one could meet me, I would have to do this alone. It would take me a lot of courage to go alone, I can tell you. Anyway, the foyer was fine. It was renovated and new and fresh, and nothing ever happened in there. It felt welcoming and modern. Upstairs in the old bar was a bit different, but nothing too bad. This was on the first floor. Second, if you're American. I still didn't like being in the old bar alone, but thankfully it was only used for meetings, so I rarely was. The third floor? Forget about it. This was where the tech room was kept. A small two-person room that was permanently boiling hot from the equipment. Except when it wasn't. The room had been the tech room since the age of literal gas spotlights. And Jeff, the tech manager, was certain the gaslight technician enjoyed his job so much that he never left. He would often be up there, apparently, in the boiling hot tech room, and it would suddenly turn as cold as a freezer. Tech would malfunction and crew members would laugh it off and blame old equipment and damp. Jeff and I knew better. In front of the tech booth was the raked balcony of chairs, and one of them was permanently kept down. This chair, right in front of where Jeff looked out to see the stage whilst doing his job during a show, was reserved for Abigail. It was taken as read that if that chair was ever up, Abigail would mess with the theater. Even the cleaners left that chair down, and it permanently had a reserve sign taped to it. Someone once said a theater is not a theater without ghosts. I don't know what it is about them. Perhaps the intense range of emotions actors have to portray and audiences feel create a spiritual vacuum. Almost every theater has at least one ghost. Theater Royal had at least 3, and not all of them were as friendly as Abigail. So when going around and setting up, then I had to walk through the auditorium to get to the dressing rooms and the rehearsal rooms, etc. Even with all the lights on, it was always just dim and cold. I always had an overwhelming feeling when walking to the backstage area that I shouldn't turn around and look up to the balcony. Abigail was waiting. I would sing loudly to keep myself calm, all the show tunes I could think of. I'm not a great singer thanks to larynx polyps, but it was enough to keep me calm. I was usually so lost in my to-do list that I could fight the overwhelming urge to look up at that seat. Then, one day, whilst painting the flats for our production of Wizard of Oz, I suddenly forgot all of the words to Defying Gravity, my go-to song for keeping calm. Before I knew what was happening, I had turned around and looked up at the balcony because I felt compelled to. I couldn't fight it anymore. It was like Abigail was calling to me. And there, unsurprisingly, was a woman in Victorian garb sitting patiently in the top right of the balcony on the seat that was always kept down for her. She didn't do or say anything. She didn't move, and I nervously smiled at her and went back to my painting. She wasn't a threat, and she was clearly watching me being the old stage to life. Our youth theater productions were always anticipated due to their brightness. Abigail seemed to think so. She liked my singing according to the theater managers who were quite familiar with her. After that, I made a point of saying hello to her when I went into the auditorium. She never said anything, but I knew she was always there. That's the first ghost. The friendly theater goer happy to keep me company. She was only ever in the auditorium and rarely moved from her seat. The backstage area was okay. Always freezing, but okay. It was only the boys' dressing room that gave me the heebie-jeebies. It was the smaller dressing room, and we only used it for the boys because we had only 3 versus the 10+ girls in the bigger dressing room. I hated being in there alone and would sing even louder when setting up costumes and makeup for rehearsal or using the small cubicle toilet. Even with the door closed, I always felt someone behind me in the hall. And I always expected the door to burst open. It never did, and I think that's in part to do with the mirror facing the door. There's an old superstition that mirrors reflecting an entrance will keep spirits out. I still never spent longer than I needed to in there. The other dressing room was fine, just something about the boys. I wonder what it used to be before it was made a dressing room in the new refurb of the back. Whoever haunted that corridor and the stairwell wasn't malevolent, I don't think. I just always expected them to just appear, and I didn't want that to happen when I was alone, thank you very much. And then there was the basement. The basement was where the props were kept, and it was underneath the stage and ran beneath the street and the auditorium. It was the oldest part of the theater, the only bit that had never been updated over the 300 years since the theater was built. It was beyond unwelcoming. What is it about basements? To get down there, I would have to go through a fairly large and heavy trapdoor in the wings of the stage. I would hook the door on the designated ties to keep it open, and then head down to gather the props we needed for rehearsal. And let me tell you, descending beneath the ground was terrifying. The silence, the must, the damp. I never sang because it always echoed unnaturally. It was behind another locked door that I had a key for, and the light switch was quite far inside. You'd have to go in a few meters in the dark before you could turn on the light, and it was quite old and blinked as it turned on like a literal horror film. So many times I've been down there and seen shadows whilst the light was warming up, and I always felt like someone was behind me. The basement used to be the dressing rooms back in the Victorian era, so there's lots of different rooms and corridors leading to different rooms. One of the rooms didn't even have a floor. It was just dirt, and I hated that little room. I think everyone did because no props were ever stored there. I don't know if there was a specific spirit in the basement, or if it was just all the emotions from all the performances gone by, but I didn't spend more than I needed to down there. Then there was the one time the trapdoor slammed shut behind me. The slam terrified me so much I literally screamed for perhaps the 4th time in my whole life. I've always been pretty calm in dramatic situations, but I hated the idea of being trapped down there. Even though the trapdoor didn't lock, it had slammed despite being firmly on the hooks. I dropped the props I was holding literally on the floor and hurried to try it, and thanking all the gods I could open it again. There was no one else in the theater, and it was about half an hour until the kids started rolling in for rehearsal. But I didn't go down there alone after that. I got the kids to help me bring up props. I wonder if the spirit who slammed the trapdoor is the same one who lurked outside the boys' dressing room. They were quite close together. The worst part? I think I know what caused the temper tantrum. The ghost light had gone out. Those who have done drama or theater their whole life will know most of the superstitions that come with the tradition, especially where theater ghosts were involved. Don't whistle because you may piss them off. Don't be up on the gantry alone in case they like playing tricks. A quick Google will bring them all up, or I may post some more traditionals in the comments. Anyway, a ghost light is a light in a theater that is permanently left on so that the ghost can feel welcome and won't mess with the performance. In Victorian theater, it was a literal bare gas light left in the middle of the stage and was the last thing lit when leaving and locking up after a show. Modern theaters tend to have a green glowing LED somewhere backstage that's not as expensive to run, or distracting for the performers. The idea is most theater ghosts were once performers, and a ghost light means they can perform when everyone has left. It's one of the taken for read traditions, like not saying Macbeth. Anyway, the day the trapdoor slammed shut, I realized after rehearsal finished that the bulb on the ghost light had gone, and I didn't know how to replace it. I hightailed it out of there once the kids had left, leaving all the lights on, and texted the theater manager. I didn't feel any more malevolence after it was replaced later that day. Like I said, theaters are superstitious and haunted places. Abigail didn't seem to mind that the light had gone out.
So I'm new here, but wanted to post these stories I have about my 70-plus-year-old family home. So I'm still currently living in my family home. I've been living back here for the past 3 years. My grandpa, Nan, and father all passed away inside the house, so there's history here. The first time I experienced something in this house was quite a few years ago. I was with my friends and we were playing a prank on another friend who was sleeping at the time. We were going to barge into the room he was sleeping in and wave sparklers in his face and make a lot of noise to wake him up. I decided to film this and share it with my other friends. When I looked back at the footage the next day, while we were preparing to barge into the room, we were trying to be quiet not to wake him. There was a very clear voice in the video that didn't belong to anyone there. It had a very thick American accent and said, "Get out of my way." None of us heard it in that moment, only in the video. Another time I experienced something in the house was when I was having an argument with my girlfriend, and mid-sentence all the taps on the house turned on at the same time. Now this could be due to faulty plumbing, but it scared the crap out of both of us enough to stop arguing. Not too sure if this is paranormal or not. I have been touched by something on the neck while washing dishes. I was home alone and washing dishes late at night, and felt a cold, almost wet touch stroke the back of my neck. It made the hairs on my neck stand up, and sent tingles down my arms. But now, we get to the interesting stuff. So because this house is very old, we have had it renovated and now the activity has multiplied. Just last night, I heard someone walking down my hallway and stop outside my bedroom. No one was home, just me. Doors are open when I know I've shut them, and doors are closed when I know I've left them open. But the weirdest one has only started in the last few nights. When I'm in bed at night, I hear someone walking on the roof. Not an animal, like human steps. I've rushed outside with a torch to check, thinking there was something or someone actually on the roof, but nothing. It has happened every night at around midnight without fail. Just someone on my roof. I'm sure I'm forgetting some stuff over the years, but this house is definitely haunted. But I don't feel unsafe. I feel as if my family are making it known that they are with me still.
Years ago, I was living outside of Buffalo, New York on an old estate on the Lake Erie shore. I rented the carriage house of an old mansion that a doctor and his wife owned. The doctor was a heart surgeon, and they were a well-to-do couple with multiple properties. so they weren't around that often. I liked the solitude of the place, having just gotten divorced, and although the carriage house was slightly decrepit, I loved living there. The mansion looked over the lake and my house was closer to the road, off a private drive that went from one side of the estate to the other. The carriage house had been servants' quarters for whoever lived in the mansion at the turn of the 20th century. There was an enclosed courtyard outside my door that was bordered by the back of my house, the carriage barn, which had stored carriages back in the horse and buggy days, a row of empty horse stalls, and a brick wall with an entrance into the courtyard. It was a very cool place to live. The rent was cheap, and there was a private 150-foot beach that was hardly ever used by anybody but me. But it was very isolated if there was nobody staying in the mansion, and there weren't any close neighbors because all the houses along the road were big estates, and a lot of the rich people living in the area weren't full-time residents. But I was young and brave, and it was a big estate full of decaying spookiness. And I'm a weirdo that likes that kind of stuff, so I was overjoyed to find the place. One night, I was coming home late, around 1 a.m. from a friend's house, driving down a street a mile or two from my house. I saw a dark figure up ahead, standing close to the road. I thought that was kind of odd because it was late at night on a weekday, not exactly party time in the Buffalo South towns. I started to get a little nervous because the person was standing as if they were waiting for someone to pick them up, and as I got closer, I could see they were wearing an unusual, black, shroud-like thing, long and dark and draped, with part of it wrapped over the person's head to look like a hood, similar to someone wearing an abaya and a hijab, only much looser, like a bunch of material just wrapped around someone's body. It seemed totally inappropriate to what I knew of the people that lived in the area to see anybody wearing anything like that, and certainly not outside at 1 o'clock in the morning on a weekday. The person was just standing by the side of the road, looking stooped over and old. I slowed down to a crawl as I approached, worried that the person needed help. Maybe it was an old senile person that had walked out of their house in the middle of the night confused. When I got close enough to really see the person, she lifted her head and looked my way, and I saw that it was my ex-mother-in-law. I was absolutely, positively sure it was her. The same gray-brown hair, the same eyes, the same enigmatic smile that had always made me wonder what she was thinking about but never saying. She raised her hand and waved at me. Not a stop and help me wave, but more of a gosh, it's good to see you wave. It scared the hell out of me. My mother-in-law had died 3 years previous to when I was driving down that road. I sped up and kept driving, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, but after a few minutes and a few deep breaths, I told myself I should go back and take another look. My mother-in-law had loved me. I couldn't imagine her ghost would appear seeking revenge on me for divorcing her son, who had not treated me well, to say the least. I drove in a square by making left turns and went down the same road again, but there was no one there. I was too freaked out to go back to my spooky carriage house with the weird sounds and 100-year-old history. With nobody there but me and the ghosts, I was convinced probably inhabited the place. So I drove to the local all-night Greek diner and sat there for an hour drinking coffee and calming my nerves. When I finally drove home and into the courtyard, I could see that something was wrong. My door was standing open, the glass windows broken, the door cracked almost all the way through from one side to the other. Someone had destroyed the door to get into the house. The next day, I found a crowbar in the courtyard, thrown off to the side. The only things I noticed missing from the house were a few pieces of my clothing. Super creepy. A jar of loose change and a knife from the kitchen. I was just divorced and not exactly rich. I didn't have much worth stealing. It's very scary when someone breaks into the house you live in all by yourself in an isolated spot. They must have driven right into the courtyard and would have been hidden from view while they broke down the door. I called the cops. They never caught anyone. With all the upset of the break-in, it wasn't until hours later that I remembered seeing my dead mother-in-law waving at me from the side of the road dressed like the Grim Reaper. I'm convinced that she somehow appeared to delay me from going home. That if I had driven straight to the carriage house, whoever the person or persons were who had broken my solid door, 100-year-old door, practically in half with a crowbar, might have been waiting there for me. Or I could have surprised them. And that things might have turned out very differently. Maybe very badly for me. Now I write fictional horror stories. I even wrote a whole ghost story novel. But this story is 100% real life true. I swear on my ex-mother-in-law's grave it really happened. You might even say that seeing my mom by the side of the road that night is part of the reason I write scary stories. So it's my recommendation that people should remember to be nice to their mother-in-law. She might help you out, even after she's dead. My parents were the first ones to move into our house. They watched it be built, so having so much activity seemed really weird to me at first. Then I learned the history of our land. Apparently a lot of the people in my area used to find arrowheads in the field where my house is now, and is rumored to also be the site of an Indian burial ground. I'm not so sure if it is or not, but my best friend's family did confirm that a lot of arrowheads were found. So even if it isn't a burial ground, people most likely died on our land. Not only that, but all the women in our family are quite sensitive to the paranormal. Especially my mom, cousin, and I. My mom has always said I was sensitive, even as a baby. I knew when people died before anyone else did. I'd stare and point at absolutely nothing. And I still to this day hear and feel stuff. Here's some stories. When I was 2, my mom's friend's granddaughter died. Before Mom got the call, I was pointing to the sky saying, "There goes the baby, Mommy." The same thing happened when Dale Earnhardt Sr. died, saying, "There goes the NASCAR man." Before it was announced he was dead, I wouldn't sleep in my own bedroom until I was 7 because I always felt something bad in there with me. I've always been able to sense when there was another presence in a room. I still do to this day, especially in my basement. My basement is a finished and furnished basement, not some dark, creepy one. When I was little, my parents made the one room into a playroom for me. I would refuse to play in there unless someone was downstairs with me. So my dad ended up turning another room downstairs into his own little man cave for that reason. We used to have a camper that I would play in, and one day I looked out the window and thought I saw my dad standing outside of it, wearing dark jeans and a black shirt. I needed to ask him something, so I cleaned up and went over, but couldn't find him. So I went up to the house, but he was inside on the computer, wearing a red shirt. When I asked if he was out there and came in to change, he said he'd be in there with the same shirt for hours. My brother used to see a woman in white and would describe her in perfect detail, right down to the color of her hair. I would not leave my room at night until I was 11-ish, when we got our dog, because I knew something was in the kitchen, always watching. When I was 12, I was at my friend Sarah's house, which is definitely haunted. I closed my eyes and saw a horrific scene play out. I saw a man in black chasing a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, and she ended up falling over the banister above the dining room. I still remember every detail of the girl, from her curly brown hair to the buttons on her blue and white dress. Records of the girl are unsure since it was a long time ago, but a man did die in that house not too long ago. 1940s, I think. Maybe a little later. At the age of 13, my friends and I did an EVP in a cemetery across from her house, and after we heard a noise, I asked if they could do it again. It happened again, and we bolted out of there. At 14, I was at my friend's house when my mom texted me and told me something pulled on her hoodie when she was doing the dishes. Trigger warning, by the way. Abuse and miscarriage. When I was 19, I moved into the hotel I worked at to get away from my physically abusive ex. A month into living there, I found out I was pregnant. Now, this hotel is known to be haunted and actually has frequent ghost tours by a group of paranormal investigators, and has even been on Travel Channel. I lived across from the most haunted room on the hotel, and I honestly think that made my depression even worse. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, quit taking my epilepsy medications. I constantly heard and felt things around me in that hotel. One day while working, I was cleaning in one of the rooms and felt a burning sensation on my back. When I lifted my shirt up, 3 scratches began to appear on my back. The paranormal group I mentioned above did an EVP session afterwards, and after 20 minutes of voices saying, "We didn't scratch her," one voice said, "Michael did it." Michael is known to be the little boy that wanders the hotel looking for his mother. Not too long after, I found out I was pregnant. I was actually really excited and saw this baby as the light at the end of the tunnel. So when a couple of people from the group came to the hotel for a birthday party, we went back to that room for an EVP with me in there. When asked why it scratched me, it said, "Protecting her." Then when we asked why and from what, it said, "She's pregnant." It didn't say what from, but I later found out. There's another ghost in that hotel that I didn't piece together until it was too late. They call her the Lady in Black, and I 100% believe she took my baby from me. A coworker told me a story about when his friend was going through the yearly haunt that have in October. A lady in black told her she was going to steal her unborn baby. Not too long after that, she miscarried. After losing the baby, I moved back in with my mother. A few months later, the power went out in the hotel while I was working. When I was going to the bathroom, I heard a petite voice say, "Mommy." I cried for hours because I knew that my baby is trapped there. A year ago, my mom was laying in bed and started falling asleep. She opened her eyes for a second and saw a face staring down at her. She didn't dream it. She was still awake. In 2019, I moved into an apartment with my best friend, not knowing it was the scene of a murder-suicide until the lease was signed. I don't believe they're still there, but you can feel the residual energy where it happened. There are multiple entities in that apartment, though, one of which seems inhuman. A week ago, my boyfriend was over and he woke up at around 6 a.m. to see a creature crawling on the ceiling. The same thing my best friend saw after we moved in. In January of 2020, I had recently got out of the hospital and my best friend had to go to her grandparents' house. So my downstairs neighbor / friend said she'd come up and stay with me. As we were laying in bed, she opened her eyes and said, "Not to freak you out, but there's a man above me staring at me." Obviously, I freaked out. I'm back at my mom's place until my boyfriend and I find a place of our own. And lately, for the past year or two, I've had to cleanse the house once a month, or else the activity really picks up. I still feel negative energy at night.
I had lived in an apartment that had recently become vacant. Anyway, I'm in my early 20s and was getting off work. And of course we wanted to drink for the weekend. So my boyfriend is out picking up liquor and picking up a mutual friend of ours. And I'm just getting off of work. I worked at a pizza shop at the time, so I usually came home just stinking and wanting to shower. This time, coming home, something was off. The place was ghetto, so the front door was a sliding glass door. To explain the layout was basically the first front of the apartment was the kitchen, and the living room, and the second back part was the bedroom and the bathroom. The bedroom just being separated from the living room by a slided door. This time coming home from work, that door was open. Let me explain. I've seen ghosts all my life, but this was different. Adrenaline shot up my spine, and my hair stood on end because there was someone in that doorway. Someone very tall, blonde, with overalls. I'm now laughing at this Ace Ventura moment, screaming into the glass door as I run away. I let out a loud scream and get the F out to call the police. Tears forming. So pissed and scared someone was in my home. I was thinking that I was going to say to the cops like I came home to find someone robbing my apartment. I had a shitty old flip phone, so even calling 911 could take a few moments to connect. I realized the person looked familiar, but how is that possible? I know this makes me slightly crazy, but I look inside and there's no one there. If it were a real human being, they would have had to jump out the 2-story bathroom window. I saw Jerry. I took the apartment knowing he had died there of natural causes. I knew him while he was alive, and he seemed like a decent guy. I originally gave him no thought because I'd been living there for months without any experiences. None. I went in there and said to him, "Hey, I know this is your place before it was mine, but don't ever scare me like that again." Who knows? Probably startled him given the fact that I saw him in full form. Ever since then, I would feel acknowledgement that he's there from time to time, but I never saw him in the flesh again. I lived there for at least a year or so after that. I have a lot of stories, so I'll just go in chronological order. I'm a pretty skeptical person, but other people have experienced things in my house, so I'm looking for an explanation. The first experience I remember, that I would call paranormal, was when I was about 6. I was in bed, but the room wasn't completely dark because there was a gap at the top of the door so light could come in from the hallway. My dad was in a band at the time, and when he would come home late, he would come downstairs and say goodnight. I wasn't asleep yet, and I was lying on my back. I open my eyes, and I see a hand over my face. Thinking it's my dad trying to scare me, I reach up to grab the hand, and my hand goes through it. I screamed, and my mom came in to see what was wrong. But no one else was in the room, and my dad wasn't even home yet. When I used to sleep in that room, I would sometimes see shadows in the gap above the door, way too high up to be one of my parents passing the door. The way my house is set up, there's a hallway in the basement. The big room at one end of the hallway has windows, and the room at the other end does not because my house is built into the side of a hill. The 2 occurrences mentioned above took place in a room on one side of the hallway without windows. I moved my bedroom from that room to the room at the very end of the hallway without windows. My friend and I were in there when we were probably 8 or 9 years old. The door was closed, but we could hear scratching on the other side, like someone was rubbing the wood with a toothbrush or something. When we opened the door, there was nothing there. I was sleeping in that room one night, door closed, and in my dream 2 children were crawling down the hallway, coming from the big room with windows. One of the children laughed, and I woke up to see my dog growling at the closed door. I didn't tell anyone about it because I figured it was just a dream. About 2 years after that, I had a group of friends over. There were 7 of us, ages 11 to 13. 2 of my friends went upstairs to get popcorn around midnight or 1 a.m., and my parents were sleeping, so they knew they had to be quiet. About 4 minutes after they left, we hear them screaming, and they come running back into my bedroom, and they are both crying. One of them believed heavily in the paranormal because she lost her mom at a young age, and it's comforting to her. But the other girl was very skeptical and doesn't really believe in ghosts. We asked them what was wrong, and they said as they were coming back down the stairs, they heard little kids laughing in the corner of the room at the end of the hallway. I know that it was not our voices echoing off the wall because my bedroom door was closed, and my room is pretty much soundproof. Basically, if you are in my room with the door closed, you can hear things outside, but they can't hear you unless you yell really loud. After they told me they heard little kids laughing, I told them about my dream, and they all agreed that was super weird. We all ended up sleeping in the living room instead of my bedroom. After that, the experiences are pretty isolated. One of my friends stayed with me during quarantine, and when he was home alone, he heard a little kid's voice clearly say, "Hi, kitty." No TVs were on, and I live in the middle of nowhere, so I don't have neighbors for at least half a mile. Last year was 13 years since my grandma died, and a painting that belonged to her fell down the stairs from the 3rd floor. As far as any of us knew, the painting had been stored in the attic, which is closed 90% of the time, and no one had been upstairs to disturb it. for online school. I've been mostly on the 3rd floor since that's where Wi-Fi is best. And sometimes when I'm doing homework, I'll hear what sounds like a little kid crying coming from the attic. I would like to say that it might be one of my cats, but neither of them make a noise anything close to that. There are weird circles of rocks in the woods behind my house that my mom calls witches' circles, but she does not believe in the paranormal at all. The last experience is not an experience of mine, and I don't know exactly when it happened, but I was probably 4 or 5. My babysitter was a family friend, and I think she was about 17 at the time, and she had to stay up overnight because my parents were away on a trip. I asked her recently if she thought my house was haunted, expecting her to say no, but she said she absolutely believed it was. She said that on one of the nights she had to stay over, at around 1 in the morning she woke up to see a little kid standing in the doorway of the room where she was sleeping. She thought it was me at first, but when she said my name, the child turned to the side and walked down the stairs toward the front door. She didn't hear the door open or close, and when she tried to follow it, she didn't see anything. She said the child couldn't have been me because I had short blonde hair, and the kid she saw had long dark hair. Aside from those, I can't think of any other stories, and I definitely don't have an explanation. My house was built specifically for us in the 1980s. My parents used to have tenants, but no one else has lived in the house since the early 90s, and no one has ever died here. I know the land where my house is built used to be an apple orchard that burned down, but I can't find any records that indicate that there was a previous house on the property, or that anyone died in the fire. If anyone has some sort of explanation for this, I'd appreciate it, and if anything is confusing, I'd be happy to clarify or elaborate.
For some context, I lived with my brother and parents in a flat in the north part of the city. Due to a legal procedure, we were evicted from that flat, so we split up. My parents and brother went to live in a flat near that area, and because I had no money to pay rent, my aunt offered me to live in the second house that she and her husband have. This house was located in the east zone of the city, a bit far from my work and the area that I used to live for more than 20 years. However, it sounded like a promising way to start my independence. The house is located in a zone that is not very safe, and the peripheria around the house is a bit shady, but it is worth it to say that it's a really big house with a big metallic door, big kitchen and living room areas, 4 double bedrooms, 2 complete bathrooms, an extra service room, and a little chapel. Second side note, my uncle studied to be a priest, and when he studied psychoanalysis, he was a very well-educated man, and he knew a lot about black magic, tarot, exorcisms, and that kind of stuff. Third side note, this house was used as the consultory house, so anything related to therapy or any other kind of stuff that he needed to sort out was dealt with in this house. Conferences, seeing patients, etc. So the first night I arrived, I had a spooky feeling about it. I went into my room and had difficulty sleeping. Then about 11 p.m., I heard 3 massive bangs that came from inside the closet. I screamed and called my aunt. She said that it was because of the neighbors, but to be honest, the sound was quite loud to be the neighbors. Every night I came in from work, I felt quite agitated and anxious. After closing the main door, I had to run upstairs to put the lights on until I came into my room. Once inside my room, I usually avoided any other areas around the house. The only other area that I would go at night was the bathroom, which was next to my room. Some creepy noises were coming during the night. It was also common to hear a window opening, which was even more scary. One day my girlfriend stayed overnight with me. So she went to all the rooms in the house, checking everything just to find anything spooky, and she found a cassette with what supposedly was a therapy session, according to the label, but when we played it, it was the following. My uncle was speaking with a woman, and this woman was saying that she had a headache. Suddenly she said, The voices in my head are trying to say something. Then my uncle asked what they were saying, and completely out of the blue, the woman started speaking with a really deep guttural voice and said something in a language that we couldn't understand at all. Then my uncle asked her to explain herself, and the guttural voice said something else, and then the cassette stopped. After this situation, a more creepy thing started happening in the house. Suddenly a lot of big and creepy spiders and scorpions were seen around just the upstairs rooms. One night when we were playing cards, something moved in the main deck from the middle of the table to the left corner of it. I barely slept. I started to leave the side lamp all night on, and I used to sleep from 2 to 3 a.m. until 5 a.m. There was a really creepy feeling around the house. There were some areas I avoided. The main ones were the kitchen, the chapel, and the room where we found the cassette. If you were there, you could easily feel that someone was behind you. Finally, I said all this to my cousin, and she explained to me that her father, my uncle, did one kind of exorcism in that house, and that he knew that something was wrong with it, but for him it wasn't too bad. All the audios were just to prove that kind of things were real and relatively common. I lived there for just 2 months, but it felt like I was there for ages. As a funny fact, the only person that used to go there regularly was my uncle and my girlfriend, but my aunt just went there once when I was moving out, and she stayed in the car park area the whole time. Some months after I moved, I asked her why she didn't go to that house regularly, and she said that she doesn't like it because she knows the house is haunted. And then she started laughing. I'm part of a paranormal team in Northern Ireland called Northwest Paranormal Research. We visit haunted locations all over the island of Ireland, but this one is probably the worst of all. We parked the cars about 500 feet from the actual house, walked up a bit of the road, then up the lane where, at the time, was all lined with a dense forest. We go inside the rundown old cottage. No power or anything here, so we set up gear. A locked-off camera and a microphone in each of the 3 rooms. We settle down in the center room where the open fireplace is. I have my laptop running, recording from all the microphones. So we settle down and do some EVPs, 3-minute bursts. In a few, we get that we think are replays, but upon amplifying it, it sounds like animals around the house. About 11:30 p.m., we are all sitting in our chairs having a break, coffee and sandwiches when we hear a loud bang, this from the room beside us. We all jump up and run in. With all the torches on, we look around to see what could have made such a noise, but there's nothing of such weight to do so. So in our heads we're all thinking, it's all gonna kick off now. But it doesn't. Not for another 20 minutes. It gets cold, and I mean Arctic cold. We can see our breath, yet the ambient temperature is 8 degrees Celsius. We hear little ticks, like someone throwing rice or something at us, but we can't see anything. We have 2 night vision cameras, and there's nothing showing up on those either. Then, from the laptop, we can see spikes in the audio, but we can't actually hear anything with our ears. There's definitely something going on, but we can't nail it down. Then one of us hears somebody calling our name, being whispered into our ear. Then I hear mine, but we have no recorded evidence of this. Despite having all this tech with us, we pull out a small table and a glass to do divination. And no, this is not like a Ouija board. This is a simpler form of communication. As we have our fingers on the glass, we ask out, is there anyone out there who would like to communicate? The glass immediately starts to swing violently about the table. We ask for the glass to stop, but it doesn't. We decide that it's getting a bit too intense, so we pack up and decide to leave. On our way down the lane, we were just chatting amongst ourselves about the goings-on. As we crossed the ditch at the bottom, I heard these chilling words roared at me, right into my ear. Never return. We haven't been back since. Other people have and have experienced bad things, but we will never return.
I've had a couple different experiences with things I don't think were of this world. One of them, though, felt more like staring into the eyes of an angry god. Back a couple of years ago, I got into a pretty bad argument with a friend. In short, I had been keeping a secret and had come clean about it. She was really mad and I went to bed feeling like shit. Of course, I'll admit, I've had some issues with mental health, like depression, and my family doesn't have a good track record with mental health either. But I had never experienced anything like this before. About halfway through the night, I woke up. I think it was a dream. Again, I think. I was sitting upright in my bed, holding a specific knife I actually owned in my hand. I looked around, and my room was illuminated by particularly bright moonlight. This was odd, since my curtains were closed, but didn't feel off. I looked at a part of my wall that the light was illuminating quite brightly, and saw words written in some kind of paint. I don't want to say blood because that sounds cheesy, but that's honestly what it looked like. The words were, "Kill yourself," written in what looked like blood. It sounds stupid, but that's what it looked like. As dumb as it sounds, I feel like those are common demonic tropes for a reason. The trope had to start somewhere, right? I should add, I have never once self-harmed, or even really considered suicide at that point despite my depression. Anyway, when I read those words, it all felt like it clicked. I held the knife up to my wrist and was about to start cutting when something caught my eye in the dark corner of my room. I squinted to get a better look and realized it was something humanoid. It looked absolutely terrifying, and had these eyes and teeth that looked like those of a deep-sea fish. Think golem mixed with a human with an anglerfish mouth. Not pleasant. When I saw it, the light in the room suddenly went from moonlight to flickering orange, as if there was a fire behind me illuminating my room. I ended up bolting upright a few minutes before my alarm, in a cold sweat. I figured it's just a creepy nightmare, so I just got up and went to school. My skin was crawling the whole drive there. I get out of my first class, and I start getting anxious, so I reach up to touch my cross necklace. As I do, a voice that isn't mine speaks in my head and says, "God won't save you." For the next few months I had these incidents, where basically it would feel like some outside force would jump on me and want me to kill myself at the slightest negative happening. I tried to face this feeling by picking up the knife to prove I could resist, but the instant I picked up the knife, it felt like I couldn't put it down. Eventually, I managed to put it back in my drawer and didn't touch it until I hadn't had an incident in a while. The incident stopped after I went outside during one. Family was in the house, and firmly told the demon it would leave. By the power of Jesus, it would leave. I honestly feel like I'm lucky that I remembered that part of the Bible because I think it worked. That was my last incident, and it sort of ended after I told the demon to fuck off. I don't know if that's what made it go away, or if it just lost interest after I wouldn't do what it asked. So yeah, that's my demon story. I actually went looking online a while back to see what I was dealing with, and I found an East Asian demon that seemed like it fit the description. A human goblin thing with sharp teeth that finds people at low points and tries to convince them to do what it wants. Honestly, if it weren't for the fact that I saw this thing illuminated in what looked like hellfire, I would just assume it was the depression. But whatever it is, it's gone now, and I haven't had a single incident in it's gotta be over 3 years at this point. I was 17, and I'm 20 now. I've always been in tune with spirits since childhood, mainly seeing apparitions or feeling energies, silhouettes, etc. This encounter was when I was in my 3rd year of university. I moved into a new student rental, the basement of the building. The house was nice, new, and in a quaint neighborhood a distance away from the university. Shortly after moving in, I felt like I was being watched. My room was in a corner of the basement, adjacent to 2 hallways, one that led to a living space, and the other that led to the entrance and furnace area. I didn't feel threatened. Over time, I would see an apparition of a little girl. She wore a white dress, had shoulder-length hair, but her bangs covered her face, which I couldn't see well. Sometimes I'd see her with a stuffed bear. Normally, the encounters would be I might walk from my bedroom to the bathroom and see her silhouette move from one room to another, as if she was curiously watching me. Fast forward to about 3 months living there, and one weekend, I'm back in my home from visiting my family. My mom, who is very in tune with spirits, pulls me aside to talk to me. She said that she knows I'm being followed, that the spirit is passing by, but is attracted to my energy. I already felt no harm, so I thought that was cool. My mom suggested one night I try to talk to her to see what she was about. While I returned to my student place, I started talking out loud before going to bed, when she was most active, saying if she feels comfortable, she can come out. I won't be harmful or anything. Another month goes by, and one night I'm studying for a math exam the next day. It was getting late, so I head to bed. Now, I've always heard that if you awake between 3 to 4, that tends to be dead hour. Fast forward, it's around 4 a.m. and I wake up, which is normally unusual for me, but it was different tonight. When I awoke, I was on my side and my vision was aligned with the wall beside my bed. I left a lamp on, since I was just too exhausted to turn everything off from studying. So I saw a shadow cast on the wall, clear as day, as if someone was standing behind me. Now, I had roommates, but I wasn't close. They were grad students, and it was the summer, so I was usually alone in the house when I was there. I turn around and see the girl. This time she's fully realized. She wasn't a transparent apparition, as if she was a living and breathing girl. I saw her white dress, her teddy bear held in her left hand, and she was looking at me, a peaceful smile. I saw her face for the first time. She was a young girl, but she quickly disappeared as soon as I awoke. It was my first time seeing a spirit in this intensity, and being so up close with one. I screamed, not out of fright, but out of being startled. After that, I never saw her again. I suspect I may have scared her off since she was timid to begin with. I felt really bad since I wanted to explore this more. But she was nice company for the time she was around. I still think about this, and how not all encounters with spirits are bad.
Lore. What is the Chapel Hill ghost light? How did this apparition start haunting a railroad track all the way out in the country? Back in the early 1900s, trains were guided by lightmen who would direct the train at forks in the route. Essentially, their job was to let the conductor know which route to take. The lightman on duty that cold winter night passed out and happened to fall on the train tracks. When the train came through that night, the conductor did not see the lightman and proceeded as normal. However, the train decapitated the lightman on duty. The lightman still walks up and down the train tracks near Chapel Hill, looking for his head to this very day. This story was told to me by my high school librarian. She also taught a Shakespeare class. This was to preface her own ghost story on how she saw the Chapel Hill ghost light. Apparently, she went down to Chapel Hill, all the way from her college town, to see the ghost herself with some friends. When they arrived at the tracks, it was a summer night around 10 p.m. They hopped out of the car and started down the railroad tracks looking for this ghost light. A light appeared in the distance and it was slowly swaying. Getting a little closer to the light, it became more erratic. At one point, it started headed their way, where they retreated back to their car and headed back home to the college town. I was a senior in high school when I heard this story and I was very skeptical. Thought to myself, no way, and googled the Chapel Hill ghost lights, and oddly enough a lot of people have seen it themselves. I still thought it was farce, but I had to go check it out myself. This was an odd time, with not much else to do either. 4 kids from my school just got expelled for partaking in illegal substances, and practically every one of my friends was grounded by this. I went to a small school, and we all hung out with each other. So when that ship sank, the whole fleet went down. Regardless, I convinced my twin brother, one of my buddies who was looking for something to do, and the basketball team manager, and we hopped in the car and headed down to Chapel Hill after a Friday night basketball game. Chapel Hill was about an hour and a half away from Nashville, and we were not prepared to say the least. It was a December night and awfully cold. We only had one flashlight. That was powered by a battery and needed to be charged. After researching on Google, we found the optimal place to park the car for the voyage. Initially, we passed the railroad track and had to double back using someone's driveway. Once we got settled, we looked down the track and there was a very faint light. We didn't think too much about it, since it could have been anything. A building, another intersection for a road, or the ghost light. The light was about 100 yards away, so we started to walk towards it. However, once we started walking towards it, circumstances changed. First, the temperature dropped, noticeably. It was already winter, and about 30 degrees, but all of us noticed a significant temperature drop once we started down the tracks. Secondly, as we got closer to the light, it would move farther away from us. Mentioned before, it was about 100 yards away, which isn't that far away. We walked about 100 yards towards it, on this railroad track in the middle of nowhere, and it would move with us. Thirdly, the stagnant light started to sway so slightly. It was a gentle sway, where we could include that. It wasn't a fixed light. It could have been the wind swaying the light, so we kept headed towards it. We walked about another 100 yards and the light kept its distance. However, the swaying got erratic, as if someone was looking for something near the side of the tracks. Truthfully, this got all of us scared, but we really wanted to get to the bottom of it. We walked about 50 more yards and the light started coming towards us, and our flashlight died. We booked it back down the tracks and got into the car and got the hell out of there. In the car we checked the flashlight and it was still showing it was fully charged and was working properly. Conclusion? So I am still very skeptical about the whole thing. I did not get a solid answer on what the light was. Was I scared? Very much so. Was it the Chapel Hill ghost light? I have no idea. I personally do believe in ghosts, but I can't say if I actually saw a ghost that night. I was 17 at the time, and being on a railroad track in the middle of nowhere at midnight is already kind of scary. I will say that what I saw was very ominous and doesn't quite make sense. I did relay this encounter to my librarian, and we just laughed about it. She told me she has been teaching for 45 years, and we were the first batch of students to go check it out ourselves. With that being said, that is the end of my story. Let me know if you have seen, or even heard of the Chapel Hill ghost light before.
This particular instance was several years ago, back when I used to have a math tutor in high school. Once a week, every Friday after school, I'd have a tutoring session at the library by my house. It started at 3:30, and class would let out around 3, so I was often early. Before my session one afternoon, I went to the washroom and noticed a woman go into the last stall. When I exited my stall to wash my hands, I noticed the last stall was vacant, but I also hadn't heard the woman leave. Thinking I was losing my mind, I shook it off and left to go meet my tutor. After my session, it was about an hour later and I was walking home. When I started to sense that I wasn't alone, I felt as though someone was walking about 5 paces behind me, but I never felt the need to check. Subconsciously, I think I knew it wasn't really someone there. I made it home and, because I'm a weirdo, stood behind my brother in the garage as he was working at our workbench, trying to freak him out. After not getting the reaction I wanted, my brother's several years older, would take a bit to actually scare him. I entered my house. Upon entering, I started noticing a woman standing in the back corner of each room I entered or passed by. She would just be standing there, motionless and expressionless. For whatever reason, I wasn't actually afraid at the time, but rather curious. I went back downstairs to explain this all to my brother, so he could tell me I was just seeing things. I began explaining this person I kept seeing, and as I began describing her, my brother started to nod and started asking questions about what she looked like. I instantly got goosebumps over my whole body, and a chill went down my spine as he, in great detail, described the exact same woman I had seen all afternoon. I stood there speechless as my brother's face fell, and he asked, "Why do you think I didn't turn around in the garage earlier? Thought it was her." Not that I've ever mentioned it to my brother again since, but I'm almost certain neither of us ever saw her again.
So, the layout of the apartment went like this. You step through the door into the foyer, and immediately to your right was the kitchen, and to your left is a shoe closet. There was a half counter separating the living room / dining area, and to the left of the living room past the shoe closet was a T-shaped hall. The shorter hall at the front led to the 2 bedrooms, one at each end, and the long hall that split this short hall went past a full-length mirror, washer, and dryer, 2 sinks, and ended in the bathroom. This hallway consistently creeped me out. Noises, movement out of the corner of the eye, and a mounting sense of dread every time one stood in the hallway was already starting to manifest, along with a lot of other instances. Anyway, so in order to avoid being scared the shit out of from my nightmares, I slowly start to become a night owl. This means sleeping all day and staying up all night. Well, one night, I decided to shower for whatever reason at a time between midnight and 1 a.m., when everyone else in the household is asleep. I start doing my usual routine, starting with washing my hair when I start to hear a faint noise that wasn't water hitting porcelain. It takes a moment to register just what I was hearing. A woman screaming. Absolute bloody murder. Anger and horror and anguish obvious in her voice, but it was so faint. I couldn't possibly fathom where it was coming from at first. I turned to look out the tiny window in the corner of the shower, the only form of ventilation in our bathroom, and think it can't possibly be coming from there. After all, I live on the 22nd floor, so I'm rinsing my hair of shampoo, dwelling on this screaming which is still going on when I finally pinpoint it. It's coming from the drain, between my feet. Okay, I think. It's probably a neighbor, watching TV, and the noise is just traveling through the pipes. No biggie. I'm fairly convinced of this now, and I'm on the train of thought wondering who the hell is watching TV while in their bathroom and wasn't doing much a thing dangerous. And as I am thinking along those lines, as if to retaliate my nonchalant brushing off, the screaming starts to get incrementally louder. Of course, I figure some fucker is just slowly turning up their TV. It takes seconds to register that the screaming is turning to faint screaming and gargling. It's not a TV. It's literally in the pipes, and it's coming closer, starting to echo as it comes up the drain. Then this thought hits me. What will be here when it finally reaches the end of the drain? Fear suddenly washes over me, the sort of fear that led me to shut the shower off, soap still half in my hair, and fall out of the shower in a panic scramble as the screaming continues. I don't bother with clothes or even a towel. I leave the lights on for my parents to scold me about in the morning because I ran through the hallway and into my room and locked the door. After that, I never showered unless someone was awake. Soon after this, the woman in the wall accident, a story I'll share later, happened. And from then on, that little window in the corner of the shower, I could feel someone staring in through it, constantly watching me. Every now and then, if I glanced up at it in the corner of my eye, I could see the swish of long black hair disappearing out of sight. I hated that apartment in some ways. Still do. Something creepy happened yesterday at around 3:30 p.m. So my parents and me were at Disney World when my dad opened up his app to check on the front door camera. Looking at the front door, there was an extremely loud banging, and then a voice that said something we couldn't make out. The footage was live. I've never seen or heard anything like that. On the camera, you couldn't see anything though, and it was broad daylight. No one else is home. The banging was definitely more than 3 knocks. At night in my parents' bedroom, there's a back door, and around 3 a.m. sometimes they will hear knocking. Not nearly as loud as what we heard yesterday though, but I tell my parents never to open the door when they hear that because I believe that's a clear indication that a ghost is trying to enter our house. They say those knocks only come in 3 though. I get back home with my family on Tuesday late evening. Other times when I was in middle and high school, I would hear very loud banging in the middle of the night like 2 to 5 a.m. that went on for years, up until I went to college on my window. It wouldn't happen in my sister's room, which happens to be closer to the front door, or any other room in the house that I wasn't sleeping in. If I slept in the office, it would happen there too. The only time I didn't experience that was when I'd sleep in my parents' room. It was almost like it would stop following me then. The only explanation I can say to think on this situation is that 2 of our neighbors died in the house facing front of ours. One, a wife died of dialysis when I was in high school. The other, her husband of bad health. Unsure exactly how. Happened last month. They had 2 sons. One killed himself when I was in 6th grade, but it wasn't in that house. The other one now still lives in that house with his girlfriend and 2 young children. We have a good relationship with our neighbors, but I really feel like these things may be coming from the neighbors that died across the street. We live in a dead-end neighborhood with about 30 houses. There's only 1 lane on our street. Everyone is relatively friendly and talkative. It's a very nice area. I've read up that 3 knocks means someone will die in our family, but nothing has happened. The back door knocks, my parents have been hearing this since about the end of last year.
In 2017, me and my girlfriend moved into a tiny, kind of crappy house in our college town. The house was made by a couple of students a few years prior, so the architecture was a bit sloppy. For example, the roof was flat. Take note of this. It will be important later. However, the house was really cheap and close to campus, so it seemed like a total steal. The first couple of months living there, nothing out of the ordinary happened, but it wasn't too long before we started experiencing strange paranormal activities. The first odd occurrence was with our smoke detectors. Our smoke detectors would go off constantly. It was strange because they would go off even if there wasn't smoke in the house. From our bad cooking, for example. We thought that maybe it was because of old batteries, but no matter how many times we changed them, it never made a difference. It got to the point that they were going off 3 to 5 times a day, and at that, we just broke down and took the batteries out of all of them. No, there were 6 detectors in total. However, even without batteries, the smoke detectors were still going off, so out of desperation, we turned off the entire smoke detector circuit of the house. It was at this point when things started to get really out of control. The back room and storage room in the house always had a really eerie feeling, like someone was watching you or standing just behind you staring down at you. Thankfully, me and my girlfriend's bedroom was the furthest room in the house from the storage area, so I avoided it like the plague. Anyways, one night at around 3 a.m. the smoke detector in our bedroom goes off. However, it's not the usual repetitive beeping. It's a single, long beep. It sounded like when someone holds its test button on a detector. Frustrated, my girlfriend grabs a chair from the dining room and stands on it to reach the detector, but moments before she touches it, the beep stops. We both groan in irritation as she goes to put the chair back. But before she makes it to the dining room, the smoke detector down the hallway from our room makes the same continuous beep. Just like before, she stands on the chair to reach the detector. But right before grabbing it, the detector stops. Our smoke detectors continue this pattern all the way back to the creepy storage room. This happened 2 more times that night. It's as if whatever was messing with us was trying to lead us to its room. This would happen to us at least once or twice a week for the next 1.5 years we lived there. Shortly after the encounters with the smoke detectors, the house became absolutely infested with bugs. There was no history of bug issues when we bought the house, and it started almost immediately after our first experience with the smoke detectors. Bugs would pour out of light fixtures, small cracks in the walls and counters, and of course, the smoke detectors. Literally, 1 minute everything would be fine, then the next winged insects or ants would pour out of the walls. We had multiple exterminators come, but less than a week after treating the house, the bugs would come back just as bad as before. It made us miserable, and I've never seen an infestation to that extreme. It was unnatural. After these occurrences, we became really terrified and depressed. We both hated being home, but there was no other place for us to go. This was when the footsteps started. Remember how I said our roof was flat? At least a few times a week, we would hear large, heavy, possibly hoof-like footsteps on the roof. We tried writing it off as being animals, so whenever we heard the steps, we would run outside to see if we could spot the animal in question, but there was never anything there. The steps were very far apart from one another. Whatever was walking on our roof would start from the creepy storage room, and in maybe 3 or 4 steps, walk to our bedroom. The steps were so loud it sounded like whatever was haunting us was either very big or stomping to get our attention. Now began the phantom sounds. We had large metal bowls that we used daily for cooking, so when we were done, we would wash them and set them on the counter to dry. The first time it happened, me and my girlfriend were sitting on the couch in the living room. The kitchen was right next to the living room, but there was an island that blocked our view to the sink area. Anyway, on this night, we were startled by the sound of our multiple metal bowls being thrown off the counter. At this time we didn't have pets, so we assumed the worst and thought someone might be breaking into the house. We both shot up and ran over to face our worst fear. But not only was no one in the house, nothing in the kitchen had been moved. The bowls were still on the counter, just where we left them. This was the most common paranormal occurrence in the house, and it happened at least 5 to 10 times a day at all hours. After a while, we were so sick and tired of these disturbances we stopped using our metal bowls, or if we did, we would hand dry them and put them away right after use. This didn't make the spirit very happy, so next, we started hearing what sounded like our ceramic plates being thrown to the ground, and our kitchen cabinet slamming over and over again. Do you know those types of cabinet hinges that close slowly? Yeah, that's what we had. So to slam the cabinets like that, they would have had to have been closed with excessive force. The next phase in our haunting was sightings and photographs. The phone I had at the time had one of those automatic face tracking features, meaning when you would take pictures on my phone, yellow boxes would appear around the person's face to focus on them. One night, I was taking a picture of me in my girlfriend's bedroom when a yellow face tracker square appeared at the foot of our bed, way above our bed. If that was a person, they would have had to be at least 7 feet tall. At the time, we did have posters on our bedroom walls, so while focusing on the face tracker square, I circled the room to confirm that the tracker wasn't just focusing on one of the posters on accident. To my dismay, no matter where I was in the room, or from what angle the square stayed in, the exact same place. Oh yeah, even better. I was home alone for a few nights. I don't think I've ever experienced such sheer terror as I did when I went to sleep that night. After this first encounter, having camera track faces and our pictures became a constant occurrence all throughout the house. The final phase of our haunting before getting the heck out of there was physical encounters. This happened more often to my girlfriend than me, but something would occasionally grab and pull our hair, especially when we were walking through the living room. But the most terrifying experience goes to our friend Jamie. She came to visit us a few nights, and while she was there, she would sleep on our couch. She was aware of all the paranormal encounters in the house, and she had seen most of them firsthand. But nothing compared to what was about to happen. It was around 3 in the morning when she woke up with an eerie, uncomfortable feeling. All of a sudden, she experienced what felt like someone or something stepping up onto the couch. It stepped both of its feet up, one on either side of her body. Starting from her feet, it slowly walked up the length of her body until it felt like 2 feet on either side of her head. She said she felt an intense, malicious energy staring down at her, but she was too terrified to open her eyes. Meanwhile, the cabinets in the kitchen began to slam over and over again. For the next few hours, she pretended to sleep, all while this presence still stood over her. She told me she's not exactly sure when it went away because she eventually became so exhausted she fell asleep. Not too long after this experience, we were finally able to sell the house and get the heck out of there. We lost tons of money because we sold the house for way less than we originally paid. I can't help but feel bad for the person who bought the house. It's been almost 3 years and she's still living there. I think the takeaway from this story is if a house is priced too good to be true, then it probably is.
This is a true story. My friend, we'll call him Jeff, thinks we encountered a ghost. I'm not convinced, but it would be a great discussion. Enjoy. One year, a friend of mine had taken me to an abandoned house on the outskirts of town. He gave me this creepy backstory about how a family had lived there in the early 80s. They were very reclusive and often described as strange and unwelcoming. The 2 children, a boy and a girl, similar in age, early teens, were described as having bleached blonde hair, sad eyes, and being nonverbal. The family lived in the house for less than 2 years when they just mysteriously picked up and left. They boarded the house up tight, and unknown persons continued to replace the boards covering all the doors and windows, and no one had moved in since. Upon telling me the story, I called Jeff out on his obvious BS. He gave me an eerie look before smirking and darting beside the house, into the backyard of the property. It was after midnight, and an overcast sky made the night darker than usual. A tiny sliver of light illuminated the ruins before me. It had snowed for a week prior, but now we were experiencing spring-like temperatures. In Canada, we can see all 4 seasons in one day. I laughed quietly and hastily followed his footprints in the melting snow. As I got close to the corner of the house, I quietly called out Jeff with no response. I assumed he was trying to scare me, so I crept as close to the side of the house as I could, in an attempt to jump out and scare him instead. As I rounded the corner, I was grabbed from the side, a hand around my mouth. I struggled for a second before I realized that Jeff was holding my mouth closed. In the very dim light, I could see his eyes were wide and wild. I saw someone run through the trees. I pulled out of his grasp. I didn't believe him. Obviously, he was just trying to scare me. No, really. I came around the corner and I saw this big shadow run into the trees. I heard it. I looked at the smooth snow on the ground. No footprints. I smiled and puffed my chest, walking toward the tree line. "Hello?" I shouted. Jeff reached out for me again. "Shut up, I'm not kidding." I saw nothing. Heard nothing. Whatever. Let's check out the house. The house itself was boarded up well. You'd need tools to break through the doors or windows, but the elements had not been kind to the house. The year prior, a tree had fallen, a large limb taking out the corner of the house. Now we could freely gain access. Entering the back of the house, you have to step onto an elevated deck. There is nothing bordering the crawl space, just a vast, dark abyss that raises up to knee level. I only mention this because I felt very exposed and vulnerable while standing beside the porch. The back corner of the house leads to the sunroom. When I entered, I immediately saw a stove tipped over on its side in the middle of the room. This clearly wasn't the kitchen. There was nothing else in the room. Just the stove. Suspicious. We walked through the main level of the house. Everything was covered in inches of dust. We weren't distinctly looking for any proof of activity, but nothing stood out as something was here recently. The house had multiple metal desks from the 80s. The ones where the chair is attached and you have a small desk surface over one armrest. Inside one of the desks was a burn spot and 3 long white candles, partially burned. In another room, all of the wallpaper looked as if it had been involved in a huge fire. The walls beneath are also charred and smoke-stained. Oddly enough, the floor and ceiling seem relatively untouched by the flames. Filthy, but not burned. There was nothing of much interest on the main floor. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, living room and kitchen, and of course the sunroom. As we were on our way out of the house, curiosity got the best of me. I walked over to the overturned stove to find that it was purposely placed there to cover the entrance to a basement. Jackpot. I excitedly motioned to Jeff to help me push the stove aside. I flashed the light on my phone down into the dark, misty hole. The first 3 steps were completely destroyed, and there was broken glass littered around the floor's opening. But if I knew we could get down there if we were careful, it was getting back up that would be difficult. Let me just preface by saying that the way the stove was laying, it was perfectly blocking our view of the room from inside the basement opening. So if someone was standing anywhere in that room, the same as the entrance to the house, we would never see them. The moment we got into the basement, I felt funny. Jeff said he felt odd right when I was thinking the same thing. We walked around the basement for a while. It was larger than we expected, and consisted of 3 rooms. The obvious basement crap was thrown around. Old metal pipes, tin cans, old bed frames, an old furnace. We were entering the final room in the basement, the one furthest from the entrance, when Jeff and I heard a very loud slam coming from upstairs. It sounded as if a book had just been thrown against the floor. Jeff and I had been laughing loudly, but now we were silent, our flashlights off, crouching in absolute darkness, just listening. Minutes went by. We heard nothing. We both laughed at each other and made jokes. We finished our search, and were on our way to the entrance when we heard an aggressive metal on wood screech from directly above us, and it was undeniable, as if one of the metal desks upstairs was forcefully pushed across the room. Now Jeff and I knew it was time to act. We scavenged some metal framing and ran to the entrance, weapons drawn. We were cautious while climbing up the broken stairs, but nonetheless, we held our courage and we stormed the main floor. No one was there. The desk had not been moved. There were no drag marks on the floor, as if nothing had ever happened. At this point, Jeff and I decided it was time to leave. We sprinted through the house, me leading the way. As I ran outside, I saw a shadow dart out from the corner of my eye and run toward the tree line. I didn't bother telling Jeff, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. Regardless, I didn't know what was going on. I wanted out of there. When we were what we thought to be a safe distance from the house, we looked at it for a while and laughed again. After a moment, Jeff fell quiet. He stared intently at the house. "I feel like I'm being watched," he said. Moments later, we heard another loud slam from within the house. Jeff and I left, finally. A couple years later, the house was demolished. I was never able to return again, but I would have liked to have gone at least one more time. But I still love telling this story around campfires. What do you think happened?
This occurred when I was around 10 years old. I grew up in a small town and lived in a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot house with 6 people. This meant my sisters and I shared a small room. My grandma decided she was tired of having no space in our room with the 3 single beds, and it was time to get a bunk bed. In this small town, I remember shopping for this bunk bed in this rundown store. It wasn't the typical furniture store. I almost believed it was a secondhand shop or some type of discount store. By the time I was in my teens, this building was turned into a billiard and game room. This place wasn't there long. The exciting day arrived. We put the bunk bed in the room, moved in a dresser with a small black and white old TV and Atari. These were not new, but moved from another location in the house. This was the late 80s. Yes, we had an Atari when everyone else had a Nintendo or a SNES. The Atari and TV were placed so that I could sit on the end of the single bed and use it as a chair while we played the Atari. The space between the single bed and bunk bed was approximately 2 to 3 feet. This is when the paranormal activity in our room started to become more frequent. I had opted to take the single bed since my sisters really wanted to sleep in the cool bunk bed. They have more stories than myself. Anyway, one night I remember being in the room alone playing on the Atari. My grandma and mom were talking to some family members that had stopped by, and my sisters were watching TV in the family room. Again, small house, small room. I know I was alone in the room. Being alone, and being alone with the Atari, was something that didn't happen often. I was focused on my game when, to my right, I could hear the bunk bed shake a little, like someone just grabbed it and shook it for a second. That had to be my imagination, right? A few more seconds go by, and it shakes again, this time for a few seconds. I remember distinctly telling myself, don't be afraid, don't look, don't be afraid, it's nothing. Almost to a high score, and if I die, I don't have to give anyone else a turn. Motivation to stay. A few more seconds go by as I keep playing my game. It shakes a third time for what I remember being the same interval as the last. Again, I tell myself to be strong. Don't be afraid. It's just your imagination. Don't even look. Well, with whatever was happening, I must have pissed it off with my lack of response or acknowledgement. The bunk bed began violently shaking with no stopping. I just stood up and ran, dropping the Atari paddle and hearing it swing into the dresser. I didn't get to beat my high score. My grandma and mom didn't believe me. I was laughed at by the visiting family members. At least I didn't have to sleep in that bunk bed or go back into that room by myself. My sisters have some more scary stories, like an old man ghost standing on the end of the bed climbing the ladder with glowing white hair. One was hearing glass shatter in the room and not being able to find the source. Quite a few more, but that was my personal scary story with it. We ended up having a house fire due to a malfunctioning AC unit 4 years later, and it destroyed that bed. After restoring the house and damages, my twin and I ended up moving back into that room with 2 single beds. The air in that room felt lighter and more free. Never had a paranormal experience in that room after that, hence we dubbed it the haunted bunk bed.
A couple of weeks ago, I wrote about seeing an old man on the garage roof on my childhood family home in Manchester. After that rather harrowing encounter, I never saw him again. I never dreamt about him again, or even really thought about him. I did have another experience in the same house a couple of years later, which frightened me even more. This one stayed with me from the night it happened as a 9-year-old all the way into adulthood. I still think about it regularly, not just because it genuinely shook me to my core, but also because I wasn't the only one to experience it in the house. As a child, I was very adventurous in my outlook towards fear and thrill-seeking. I'd watch every horror film I could get my hands on. I'd read the scariest novels in my parents' library. I'd throw myself willingly at anything that might have a chance of scaring me. Nothing ever really came close. Once I got into the upper ages of primary school, I started going out with my friends more and staying out later. My parents were very relaxed with my curfew. They knew me well enough to know I'd never put myself in danger or get into trouble, so I was generally allowed to stay out a lot later than the other kids in my group, who had to be home for around 7 p.m. The park we used to hang around at was further from my house than anyone else's, so I always ended up alone walking home. One night I impulsively decided to take a different, longer route home that took me past a cemetery. It was the same cemetery that a few of my relatives were buried in, so I was pretty comfortable being there. I stopped to look at the black gates guarding the entrance. They were huge, easily 3 times my height, and were in pretty poor condition. It must have been years since they were painted or had the rust scraped off them. The gates were covered in moss, and the spikes mounting them had pierced an assortment of different colored leaves, and spider webs covered the tips of them, with threads connecting each spike. I wanted to go in. I don't know why, but something felt as though it was pulling me in. The gates were barred shut in the evening, so my only way in was to climb. I eventually talked myself into doing it. I was more worried about someone seeing me do it than any danger that might befall me while attempting to get over them. I was a fairly athletic kid, so getting over was no issue, and I was certain I hadn't been seen, even though my weight made the gates rattle loudly and violently. Once I was inside the gate, I just walked around, reading the names and ages of the people buried there, taking in when they were born and when they died. Like most cemeteries, the newer plots were at the front, so I started heading deeper to find older graves. I must have been walking for about 20 minutes when I saw a very unique looking headstone. It was about 10 feet tall and was shaped like an angel holding a baby with a young child standing beside her. The faces that had been carved into the stone had been weathered away, leaving them featureless. They were eerie to look at in those surroundings, and with the sun having long since set. There was no noise except the rustling of the trees and the occasional sound of a car driving past the entrance. I knelt at the grave and tried to make out the names on the graves. There were 3, and they'd been dead for a long time. The name at the top of the list, I refused to type in, was clearly the mother given her age. The other 2 were younger, children. The elder of the 2 had died at the age of 8, while the youngest had only lived for a year. The dates of their deaths were the same. All 3 had passed away at the same time. As a 9-year-old, I understood how odd that was, but not that it could have, and likely meant they died in a tragic accident, or in a murder/suicide. While I was observing the gravestone, I heard a branch snap in the distance, behind me. I immediately jolted around and began scanning to see what had caused it. It was tough to see, but I couldn't make anything out. While my back was turned on the grave, the hairs on my neck tingled, like someone had blown on them. It was enough to tell me I shouldn't be there, and I needed to leave. I ran towards the exit and scaled the gates without worrying how much noise I was making. Once I was over the gates, I began making my way home. Occasionally I glanced back into the cemetery through the cast iron bars. I was being followed. I was sure of it. The graveyard was pitch black, but I could still make out the silhouette of a person walking alongside me, but much deeper in. I quickened my pace, but the shape kept up, and it now looked closer than before, like it was walking closer towards me, but also still moving sideways. I ran across the road without looking. A car had to slam its brakes to avoid hitting me. The driver beeped her horn and glowered at me. I paid her no attention. I was only thinking about getting home as quickly as possible. I ran the rest of the way. By the time I got home, it was pretty late. My mom told me to get washed up and go straight to bed. I did as I was told. I wanted to put my time in the graveyard behind me and move on to a new day. While I was asleep, I kept dreaming about the cemetery and the silhouette that had moved alongside me. Then I dreamt about the silhouette walking through the streets of my neighborhood and heading straight for my house. In the dream, the silhouette headed straight into my house, up the stairs and to my room. I woke from the dream and stared at my ceiling. I could see a small amount of light coming through my door. It was ajar. I never slept with my door open, and once shut, it was impossible for the door to open without turning the handle. My room was deathly silent as usual, but I could hear someone walking around in the infinite darkness. That was the floor space in my room when the curtains were shut. I peeked through the gap in the railing of my bed and could see the silhouette standing by my wardrobe. Thanks to the light coming through the small opening of my door, I shut my eyes and tried to regain my composure. I could hear it moving around. The noise stopped and the usual silence in my room at night returned briefly. It was broken by the sound of my bunk bed steps groaning under the weight of someone climbing them. I heard the first step, then the second, and then the third. I opened my eyes to look and saw the shape looking back in my direction from the top of the steps. For a split second, I was transfixed. It wasn't a silhouette anymore. It was a woman wearing a black dress with a veil covering her face. Her face had no features, just like the headstone I'd stopped to look at in the cemetery. Even without eyes, I could tell she was looking at me. I threw the covers over my head and hoped that would be enough to hide from her. It wasn't. I felt her weight shift from the steps onto the bed itself. I felt her edging closer to me. I could feel the weight of her on top of me. It was suffocating, crushing. She moved in the most unnatural way possible, more like a snake than a human. She was shifting up the bed and closer to my face until she stopped. I knew her face and mine were now level. I shut my eyes again and told myself no matter what happened, I would not open them again. My covers were pulled away and I could feel her breath on me. It was odorless and cold, like the breeze that squeezes under a closed door. After what felt like an eternity had passed, I couldn't keep my eyes closed anymore. I opened them and looked at her. She wasn't featureless now. I could see her. I could see her old, freckled skin, her pointed nose and thin lips. Her eyes were closed, so tightly they looked sealed shut. Only a second had passed before I let out the biggest scream I had ever managed in my life. I wanted to wake up every person on my street if possible. The woman slithered away without making a sound, without opening her eyes. I heard my parents' door open and the steps of my bed creaking. My mom and dad burst through my door and flicked my light on. As my eyes struggled to adjust, I could only make out the silhouettes of my parents and the woman. She walked right past them without them noticing. They spent the rest of the night reassuring me that it wasn't real. My dad took me back to my room after I'd started to calm down. I stepped in and saw a muddied footprint on my carpet. I pointed it out to my dad. He could see it too. I could see it on his face. He was uneasy about it. He suggested I stayed in their room. Eventually, I managed to fall back to sleep. The next day, my parents agreed to swap our rooms around. I never experienced anything paranormal in that house again. We moved about 2 years later. I know my dad will have convinced my mom to swap the rooms. I didn't find out why until 3 years ago, when my dad passed away from cancer. In the evening of his funeral, me and my family stayed up talking about our lives together. My mom mentioned what happened that night, and I told everyone who didn't already know the story. When I finished it, my youngest sister, who wasn't alive at the time this happened to me, and my mom shared a look. I asked them what it was for, and my mom told me that my dad had seen something almost identical to my experience. The same woman, the same feeling of her crawling towards him on the bed and just staring at him. He didn't tell me because he didn't want to frighten me more about the whole thing, and once we'd moved and time had gone by, it was no longer something to even talk about. According to my mom, he'd seen the woman wandering around the house and many times after that night. My mom believes in the paranormal but has never experienced anything herself, but she always said me and my dad were very receptive to things like this. The woman has haunted my dreams so many times over the years, and even now, despite the fact I live hundreds of miles from that home, there are times where I feel like she is watching me still. There are times when I can see a silhouette on the other side of the road. Only when I turn my head, there's nothing, or no one there. To this day, I'm convinced that woman haunted my dad and is still doing the same to me. Apologies for the length of this. It's a long story to tell, but it wouldn't feel right not including what happened in the cemetery, as I'm convinced I brought her back with me and into my home. This happened back in 2013. My whole family and I, including my relatives, my dad's elder sister's family, decided to visit my dad's home country, Pakistan. So, my dad lived in Pakistan until the age of 13. He lived in this rural village up northwest in Pakistan. So my dad's village is surrounded by cemeteries. Back then, there weren't proper roads for cars yet, and on the way to my family home, you have to walk along this gravel path, and on the left side of the path is a school. Everyone in the village claimed it was haunted because sometimes you can hear loud chatter at night. And on the right side of the path is a cemetery. It was around 8 p.m. My brother and I were chilling at my cousin's house because he was home alone. We haven't had dinner yet, and we were starving, so my brother and I decided to go home. And we brought our cousin with us so we can all have dinner together, and he can sleep over at our place. Since it was 8 p.m., there was no electricity at all. This happened all the time during our trip, but I'm glad we had a generator at home. Anyway, since there was no electricity, no lights were on the pathway to our home. We turned on the flashlight from our phone and were walking towards the gravel pathway. We were taking our time to walk because we were afraid we might trip since there are stones everywhere. Suddenly, there was this old man crouching next to the headstone. I told my brother and my cousin to ignore him and just walk a bit faster. The old man then shouted my cousin's name, and we stopped to look at him. He walked up to us and greeted us. He then asked my cousin whether he was John's son. Let's pretend John is my uncle's name. And my cousin replied, yes. He then asked us what we were doing so late at night, and that it was really dangerous for us to be out at this time. We told him that we were planning to go home for dinner. He said, okay, you guys go ahead. I'll walk with you because it's not safe in the dark. We thanked him, and were all walking in silence. Then suddenly we felt a chill and looked at the back. The old man disappeared into thin air. There should be no place for him to disappear that quickly because, first of all, he is old, and the way he was walking up to us, he limped a bit. And second, there was no other way for him to go except go back down the gravel path, which the entrance was at least 2 minutes away. My cousin, my brother, and I just looked at each other and we screamed and ran home. It was truly terrifying. I don't have many memories of my father, because he died when I was just 8 years old. However, I do clearly remember the night several years later when he let us know that he was still around and still watching over us. First of all, you need to know something about my father. He was fascinated by the supernatural and by the possibility of some sort of existence after death. After it became clear that he would soon lose his battle with lymphatic cancer, he told my mother not to worry. If there's any way for me to reappear after I die to let you know that I'm okay, he said to her, then that's what I'm going to do. I'll visit you and the kids all the time. It's going to be so cool. My mother said her response to that was a pointed and succinct, don't you fucking dare. It wasn't that she didn't care what happened to him after he died, or that she didn't want him watching over us. She just knew she wasn't going to be emotionally capable of dealing with that situation. And she promised him that's how she would react. My father followed through with his promise, though. The story my mother told us was that she was in their upstairs bedroom a few months after his death, thinking about him and crying because she missed him so much. Then she suddenly had the distinct feeling that she was being watched. She turned her head, and saw my father standing outside the bedroom window on the balcony, clear as day. He looked healthy and alive. He was wearing a bright blue shirt, and he gave my mother a look that said, "Is it okay if I come inside?" My mother said she stared at him for a moment in total shock. She deliberately blinked her eyes to make certain that she really was seeing what she was seeing, and when she opened her eyes, he was still there, smiling and waiting. That's when my mother followed through on her promise. She closed her eyes tightly and said out loud, "I can't handle this. I'm sorry, but I need you to go away, and please don't ever do this again." After about 10 seconds, she opened her eyes, and this time he was gone. The next part of the story takes place a few years later, and I have to set the scene for you. I took a bad fall while playing soccer, and the impact totally destroyed my shoulder. I broke it in 2 places, and every ligament and tendon was torn. The reason this is important to the story is this. My shoulder hurt so bad that I couldn't easily walk up the stairs to my bedroom, which was across the hall from my parents' bedroom. I was temporarily sleeping in the guest bedroom downstairs, and my brother had the bedroom we shared all to himself. The bedroom was right above the guest bedroom. In the hallway outside the guest bedroom, there was a sideboard with shelves on top and drawers below, and on those shelves was an old mantel clock. It looked a lot like someone cut off the very top part of a typical grandfather clock, and it was small enough to fit neatly on a shelf. The clock had to be wound every so often with a special key, which was kept in one of the drawers below. And when it was properly wound, the small pendulum would swing back and forth to keep the clock going. My dad loved this clock, and while he was still alive, he made sure to wind it so that it never stopped. After his death, though, my mother never wound the clock again, and it eventually stopped. So this clock had been completely silent for years. Late one night, I was trying to go to sleep, but the pain of my injured shoulder was keeping me awake. Plus, as a kid, I had terrible anxiety. Even with the bedroom door closed to help me feel more secure, I wasn't comfortable sleeping in the unfamiliar surroundings of the guest bedroom and being the only person downstairs. Just as I was finally feeling like I might be able to sleep, I heard something in the hallway outside the bedroom door. I was immediately freaked out and wide awake because my mother and my brother were still upstairs. The stairs in this house were very squeaky, and I knew for a fact I had not heard anyone walking down them. It sounded as though someone or something was messing around with the sideboard. First, I heard a drawer open and then shut. After that, I heard a loud click, followed by a strange sort of grinding sound. Then there were a couple more clicks, and suddenly the clock that hadn't made a sound in years started ticking. The sound I had heard before wasn't grinding, it was winding. Someone took the key out of the drawer, opened the lock, wound it, and started the pendulum. Apparently, they also put the key in the drawer where it belonged, because that's where we found it later. At this point, 11-year-old me was not only wide awake, but I was also scared as hell and hiding as far beneath my covers as I could go with a broken shoulder. After all, when you're a child, covers are magical and repel all evil things, right? The next thing I heard was someone walking up the stairs. Then, everything was quiet for a short while. Soon, though, I heard footsteps moving all around over the upstairs. I even heard someone directly above me open and close the creaky sliding closet doors in my bedroom. After that, I clearly heard footsteps come down the stairs, and someone opened and then closed the door to the guest room, where I was struggling to breathe inside my deep, dark covers cave. Soon after that, the footsteps returned up the stairs, and finally all was silent, except for one thing. The clock continued with its relentless tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. Eventually sleep caught up with me, and I didn't wake until my mother came to check on me in the morning. While we were eating breakfast that morning, my mother looked at me and paused for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Were you up and walking around last night?" I told her I was not, and then I described to her all the noises I heard. My mother told me she heard noises during the night too, and she searched all over the house to see who it was. It was her walking all around upstairs, opening and closing the squeaky closet, coming down the stairs, opening and closing the guest bedroom door, and going back up the stairs again. So who made the other sounds we both heard first? We wondered. And why was the clock ticking? Suddenly my mother's eyes grew wide. "Oh my goodness," she said. "Last night was the anniversary of the night that your dad died. I think it must have been him trying to let us know that he's still watching over us." And with that, we both went to look at the clock, which was still ticking. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Thanks, Dad. Message received. We love you too, and we miss you." A bit of background. I grew up in a little village just outside Cambridge, UK. My family house is not that old, mid-60s, and built on old water meadows. The house itself is a bungalow, so all the rooms are on one floor. The living room, lounge, kitchen, etc. to one side, and bedroom/bathroom to the other. The house is next door to the local church, which is very old. Foundations are Saxon. The main building of the church was built during the 13th to 15th century. There are a few tales about the church and its environs, but that's for another time. On to what I have experienced in my family house. I would say most of my experiences that I remember happened from about 15 to 19. When I left for university, I will highlight some of the more memorable ones, but was pretty consistent in just a background level such as doors opening, hearing your name on the breeze. Even now there seems to be at times a breeze through the house, even if all windows/doors are shut. One of the most memorable moments, I had just moved bedrooms from the one I shared with my brother to the smaller bedroom my sister had just vacated, as she had gone to drama school in the Southwest. I was quite happy as I was 15, and actually had my own room with my own TV. It was 94. It meant I did not have to watch songs of praise. The room itself was 13 square feet, I think, with one window overlooking the back garden. My sister had always said in that room she would be woken up in the middle of the night with someone banging really hard on the exterior wall. I ignored it, being the younger brother. I thought she was going mad, though we always felt someone looking at us from the dark of the garden at night. I get myself settled in the room. A week or two passes with nothing happening. It's late August. It's warm. I have the window open. I wake up. I think it was about 3 in the morning. The house is quiet and dark. I hear the sound of something hitting rock or ice. A chipping noise from the garden. I found out later this was a precursor of what happened next. I was very awake by this point. This goes on for a while. I thought I heard some talking faintly. Next moment, bang, bang, bang right on the wall behind my head. The external wall. Felt like someone wanted to smash in. Panicked hammering of the wall. This happened for a minute. Could be longer. Felt like an eternity. Then silence. Nothing. Could not explain it. Heart pounding. Couldn't sleep that night, or other times it happened. It was about half a dozen times, but it was not the most vivid thing that happened in that room. I think the most vivid thing that happened was only once from what I remember. I was about 17 at the time. I got into the habit of leaving the radio playing in the background while I slept. I still sleep better with noise in the background. I woke in the middle of the night. The house was quiet apart from the radio playing Hyperballed by Björk. It had just come out. I felt a massive weight on my chest. Can only just move my arms. I slowly move them towards my chest to see if I can remove the invisible weight. Inch by inch, My arms seemed to struggle. I was playing rugby a lot at the time. I was fit and strong. Should not have been that hard. Then managed to get my arms together. The weight disappeared suddenly. I then look at the door. It opens a crack and I can picture it now. A lady's hand slowly comes in. Very strange. It's pale, almost translucent. I can see the end of what she is wearing. It is a embroidered lace, with flowers Victorian looking. As bizarre as it sounds, it reaches the light switch. It's a dimmer, so it turns it slightly on, then moves away again. Nothing else. Just saying it was there. Don't sleep much that night either. I think this post is long enough. I hope you found it interesting. I experienced a few other things during the years, including someone shouting, "Go away," in a quiet area of St. Paul's Cathedral catacombs. Looked at a grave. I was quite calm about that, strangely. When I was about 11 or 12, my two friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to the sister, Dee, of one of my friends involved in this story. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back into the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently, ending a Ouija conversation without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend Eric was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asked if there was anyone with us, if they want to tell us their name. The planchette spelled out ANDREE. Okay, cool. My middle name. At this point, I was sure that Eric was messing with me. YOUMUSTRUN. You must run. Just remembering and writing that gave me the chills. So obviously we're pretty much done talking to spirits and say goodbye. Noped the fuck out. Decided we'd go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant, and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring, so we did. Eric's always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly we both got a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, and he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Eric and I each had a grip on either of his arms, when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property, and he could finally breathe. He was disturbed, and he just wanted to go back in his house for the night. Eric and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis/waist. I had slept alone. Eric couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed. Not my choice, by the way. And I'd never scratched myself like that. It never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day.
Short backstory. 4 years ago, shortly after my mom died, I started playing with the spirit board, not believing it was real. Something got attached to me. One day, I was sitting in a room with my friends while they played with the board themselves. They told me it was spelling out my name. Sure enough, it was. I walk over and ask it what it wants, and it starts spelling out Mom, fast and repeatedly. I've never used one again. I was being followed by something for about 2 months after that. About 2 weeks ago, my friend bought some dowsing rods. I brought him over to my place and we started asking questions and got responses right away. This thing seemed like a benevolent entity, so we indulged it and keep playing occasionally, questioning it and trying to figure out what it was. I have a 2-year-old sister that has nightmares and wakes up practically every night and has to be rocked to sleep in a recliner in the living room. Yesterday, I was tossing and turning all night and could barely sleep. I woke up around 6 a.m. to the very same recliner rocking while everyone was asleep. I brought my friend back over and questioned it to try and figure out what it was. I asked if this was the same thing that followed me 4 years ago. It said yes. I asked if this thing was potentially my mom, and it said yes, but I knew it definitely wasn't. I just wanted to see if it was lying or not. I called bullshit to it, and asked if this thing is what was rocking the recliner, if it was evil, and if it was what I encountered 4 years ago. It said yes to everything. I could have lied, but I don't know. My friend was calling it names and asking it to show itself, make something move, etc. Nothing happened. Later that night when I got home around midnight, I tried to go to sleep. I've never been so terrified in my life. I kept hearing shit happen every 15 seconds, it felt like. It was bad, loud, and very disturbing. I heard loud footsteps that seemed to be going around me. I heard my TV creak. I heard my fan physically move. I heard something in my kitchen move. And I swear, I could feel when this thing was right next to me. Around 2 a.m., I wake up to my little sister screaming and crying the worst it's ever been. I don't know what to do. I've tried to convince my dad, but he flat out denies anything is going on and simply doesn't believe.
Last night was the worst night of my life to date. Something happened that was so terrifying that my boyfriend and I decided to get a hotel room, which was very difficult to do because of COVID lockdown rules. We had to send my cat to my mother's place because we didn't want anyone getting hurt. It started when we had some thunderstorms roll through. My boyfriend and I really enjoy thunderstorm watching on our patio, so we went out with a cup of tea and sat and watched the storm. While we were outside, we heard knocking at our sliding glass door. We assumed it was my cat Missy, so we ignored it for a bit. It kept getting louder and louder until we finally looked to see what it was. Glass was shaking from the pressure of the knocking, but nothing was there. No cat, no person, no nothing. Just the knocking and the panes of glass vibrating. We freaked out for a bit and just stood watching the glass moving and listening to the knocking until the rain started. It was pouring so bad we had to go inside. The knocking stopped as soon as my boyfriend put his hand on the handle. We entered slowly and went into the bedroom away from the sliding doors. The bedroom looked like it had been turned upside down. The covers were torn off the bed. The nightstand was upside down. All my clothes and my boyfriend's clothes were scattered everywhere, and the cat was hiding under the bed. We cleaned up quickly and went into the kitchen to chill for a bit before bedtime. We didn't talk about what had happened because we didn't want to acknowledge it. We just tried to go about our nightly routine and go to bed. That's when all hell broke loose. We were laying in bed while I was on TikTok and my boyfriend was reading, and we started feeling really scared. My boyfriend just looked at me, and I knew he was feeling what I felt. We shifted closer together and started listening for something, anything to happen. Our cat, who was at the bottom of the bed, ran out of the room suddenly and made my boyfriend and I more uneasy. That's when we felt it. We felt the bottom of the bed press down and heard the springs compressing. We saw a large dent in the foot of the bed grow until it looked like 2 handprints and 2 knee prints, like someone was on all fours on our bed. All we could do was stare in horror as the prints started moving up towards us slowly. If we tried to get out of bed, we would have to go through whatever was there. It had moved to the point where I had to pull my legs up to my chest to avoid the prints. The prints suddenly disappeared and my boyfriend and I ran out of the room as fast as possible. We grabbed Missy and ran to the car, only stopping to grab wallets and keys. We are currently still at the hotel and we can only afford 1 or 2 more nights. We haven't slept yet and we are really scared to even talk about what happened. So this happened a few years ago when I was about 23 or so. A small group of my friends were all interested in the paranormal, and they often went ghost hunting, and often they came back with nothing. I, on the other hand, didn't really believe in the paranormal, or I thought there was a scientific reason behind it. Now, this isn't the first time I've experienced something paranormal. When I was younger, I used to see a white orb in my room, but that's a story for a different time. So one day after we were chilling at a local arcade, they wanted to go ghost hunting again, and normally I would pass and go play games at home, but a girl who I had a huge crush on at the time, we'll call her A, said she's down and that she bought a thermal camera for it. So wanting to be around her more, we got set off for the night hunt. We drove for about 15 minutes till we reached our destination and parked a subway parking lot. There were about 6 to 8 of us. There was myself, A, her best friend at the time, C, and the rest I didn't know that well. After we parked, it took us about 5 minutes to reach the local church, and we had to cut through their parking lot to reach a little wooden gate. From there, it took us to a neighborhood, and we had to sneak around and avoid cars since it was about 2:45 a.m., and a group of teenagers wearing mostly black wouldn't look too good. Anyways, it took us about 10 minutes to reach the woods where our ghost hunt location is at. So we got ready, and by get ready, I was checking my Facebook if any of my friends are online. So we started walking, and it isn't too deep into the woods. Like, I could see homes and such. We were walking on a dirt path, and all I could think of is how much I hate mosquitoes. The walk was boring, to be honest. Nothing happening out of the ordinary. But everyone else was freaking out and saying that they saw this and that. Once we made it through the woods, it led us to a baseball park on the other side of the neighborhood. We sat down and chatted for a bit, trying to decide on what to do. Either go around the woods to get back to our cars, or walk back through the path again, which is shorter. We decided to walk back down the path. On our way back, I was near the front and I made a decision that might have caused what happened next. Somewhere near the middle of the trail, I started to welcome the paranormal and push it to do something or anything. In my head, I was saying something like, "Go on, do something to me. Show me you're here. Use my body. Anything." I suddenly started to feel numb and lightheaded. I remember starting to get tunnel vision, like I could see the edge of my vision fading into darkness, and suddenly I woke up to a guy there holding my face with his hands, and he's whispering or saying something in a different language to me. Everyone was staring at me and asking if I'm okay. I said yeah. What happened? They said I stopped a few times, that I wouldn't respond when they were asking me questions, and overall just acted differently. They also said I would laugh, but I didn't believe them on that one because I tend to be on the quiet side. After that, everyone was saying that we should call it a night, but they wouldn't want me to drive. The next morning when I woke up, I had some scratches on my arm, but I chalked it all off to some tree branches. A's friend C messaged me on Facebook asking if I was okay, and I said, yeah, I'm fine. I asked what happened, and she told me about it. I asked about who was there, and she mentioned a few names, but the only name I could remember was Tim or Timothy. She said there wasn't anyone there with that name. Half an hour passed by, and she messaged me back with a website link. When I clicked on it, it opened up to a missing child's page for a kid named Timothy, 8 years old and went missing a year or two before we went there. The boy's last seen location was the town with the woods. I've also had the urge to go back to the woods for 2 weeks. I had a few things happen in the duplex apartment I lived in with my sister, mom, and occasionally my mom's ex-husband when they were off and on when I was little. The first thing that happened, one night I was asleep in bed but having an awful dream. The sky was dark, blood red, and there was a lot of lawnmowers sitting around covered in blood as well. It scared me enough that I woke up, and after a few minutes of trying to decide if I should go in with my mom and sleep, I decided to try to close my eyes again. Before I could close my eyes, I saw 2 figures float out of my wall. One of them was a little girl with a Victorian, maybe style dress and curly blonde hair. The other was a black mask that I could tell was a man, but it had no face. I had a very intense feeling that the little girl did not want to be with the man. I could feel a fear from her almost. As quickly as they appeared, they turned and walked back into the wall. I ended up dragging my sister with me into my mom's room, where she revealed she'd seen something too, but didn't know what it was. She slept with my mom that night. The second experience in that duplex, my sister and I were sitting on the stairs. Right around the corner of the stairs was the little attic type thing that we would always find objects that had gone missing. Keys, silverware, etc. Well, while we were sitting, my sister was a step above me, sitting facing me, and we were talking. Suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder and it gave me such a hard shove that I tumbled down the stairs and ended up with both of my eyes being blackened. After the stairs incident, my mom was frightened enough to move out of the duplex. However, I've always felt sensitive to things ever since. I always feel like I see things, and if I have my back turned in bed, I feel extremely uneasy and scared and have to face outward toward the open door. I've always wondered if something could be the cause of my severe anxiety and depression that developed during my childhood. Here's a story from my workplace. It was around Halloween, and we were throwing a haunted house. We were working on it throughout the day before we were holding the event, which got us late into the night. It wasn't so bad because we had an event that was going late into the night. We finished up about 85% of it before we would start to go into overtime, which is a big no-no. Luckily, the event that was going on earlier was done, and it was just closing up everything there. The bartender comes in to close out her register before realizing what we were doing. We'll call her Mrs. H, who is this old Korean woman who can be a pain in the ass to work with, but we still love her. Her eyesight isn't the best and she's easily scared, which will come into play later. We give her a tour of the haunted house, which still had moonlight coming in, so it wasn't completely pitch black. The black lights and blocking out the windows would be done the next day. As we're going through, Mrs. H is holding my manager's, we'll call her K, hand in one as I trailed behind them. Suddenly Mrs. H lets out this loud scream. Now we've startled and scared her before, because we gotta have fun, but this scream of hers was different. The other screams were from surprise, fear from someone jumping out behind a wall to scare her. This one was a lot more intense. She curls up next to Kay, trying to hide behind her as she looks in my direction. Mrs. K, what's wrong? What happened? Kay and I both ask. Someone grabbed my hand, she says, hysterical. I was about 5 feet away from them when we were walking through, within arm's reach, but I have to lean in to get to them. Kay and I immediately look at each other, then glance around. Oh no, it was just him playing a joke on you. He didn't mean anything by it. Kay quickly responded. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mrs. H. I didn't mean to scare you like that, I added. We calmed her down and get her out of the haunted house. As we finish up for the night, we see her holding her hand a bit. Kay and I ask to look at it, and it is red like someone gripped her hand tightly. Mrs. H says it was probably when she snatched her hand away, but I don't think she believed the lie we told her to calm her down. So I've had a lot of paranormal experiences ever since I was young, as I'm quite sensitive to these sorts of occurrences, as passed down by my mom. But this is one I genuinely feel lucky to have experienced. I would have been 13 to 14 at the time. Quick layout of the house. You walk in the front door. If you keep walking straight, you end up in the kitchen. If you turn right, lounge room. Turn left and there is a long hallway with 2 bedrooms on the left and a bathroom and 1 bedroom on the right. So this particular night, the whole family, mom, dad, sister, and me, were on the couch watching TV, facing the hallway. As I'm just glancing off down the hallway, I see a little boy run across from one room to the next. There was no sound of footsteps, but I could hear a cheeky, childlike giggle, which only I had heard. I got my mom's attention and told her that there was a young boy running in the hallway and began to describe his light brown hair as it bounced with each step. His sporty shorts and shirt and his cute little sneakers. Mom starts to get a bit weird and gives Dad the look of, should we tell her? They decide they'd rather not keep me in the dark, luckily for me. My mom then begins to tell me that she sees him too. His name is Joe, and that he is my little brother. I'm so confused as it had only ever been just my sister and I. She confessed she had a mid-late term miscarriage a couple years after I was born, and she said that this is who we're seeing. We have learned a lot about Joe over the last few years. He likes to follow me around and tug my shirt to remind me he is there. He has also told us that he gave up his life because he was to be born with major disabilities that my family wouldn't be able to deal with. So he moved on to give us a chance of a life without the struggle. I can't imagine what my mom went through losing a child, but it has to bring some sort of comfort to know he is still around. If anyone has any opinions or info on aging in the spirit world, feel free to share, as I would love to know more. So I've talked before about how my job is haunted, and I've had another experience tonight, but it actually reminded me of something I want to talk about more. See, tonight my employees all had to leave by 10:30, and we were short-staffed, so I had to finish the cleaning and paperwork. I was finishing up as midnight rolled around, and exactly as the clock hit 12, it seemed as if whatever is there in the story decided, get out or I'll kill you. Because suddenly I felt an overwhelming sense of danger and rushed out of the restaurant. This isn't a feeling I've gotten more than once before, and never from anything I can actually observe. This other experience happened on Thanksgiving 2019. Me and my fiance had moved into our apartment that summer, and we're now living in a different town. So when we left to go to her uncle's house, we ended up going through some places we've never been. The house was a fair bit away, and my fiance didn't feel comfortable driving on highways, so we were taking residential routes. I'll never forget. It was between 4 and 5 p.m. as we entered this neighborhood. The second we crossed the threshold, my eyes started to tear up, and I sank into my seat on instinct. I said without even processing it, something is wrong. Something is watching us. My fiance was concerned, but she focused on her driving, and we just kept going. We were in that neighborhood for about 7 minutes, and the whole time that feeling remained. I have no idea what it was that was haunting us. I kept scanning rooftops, looking behind us, scanning everywhere around, and I saw nothing. Every car was parked. Not a single living thing was around. Not a bird, squirrel, or a person. It was so dead, and that sense of being hunted remains. Finally, we reached the other side, and the second we left, it felt like a weight off my chest. To this day, I still have no idea what made me feel that way, and I honestly try to forget because it was so horrifying. But tonight I felt it again, and I bolted like a bat out of hell. Here's another story from Okinawa, Japan. This one was told to us by the Smith family, good friends of ours whose home also seemed to have various spirits dropping by from time to time. For purposes of this story, let's call the father Bob, the mother Sue, and their 12-year-old son Jake. One perfectly ordinary night in the Smith household. After everyone went to bed, Jake had a mysterious visitor. He was just on the edge of dropping off to sleep when he started to hear a shuffling noise in the darkness of his bedroom. As he was trying to figure out what the noise might be, someone or something unseen lay down in Jake's bed right behind him. He could feel the weight of it on the bed and the dent it was suddenly making in the mattress. Jake panicked, leapt out of his bed screaming, and quickly turned on the light. On the bed he saw nothing. There were only his normal blankets and pillows, and the dent in the mattress was gone. Bob and Sue heard Jake cry out, so they rushed down the hall to see what was the matter. Jake explained to his parents what just happened, but understandably they didn't really believe him. Bob told Jake he just had a nightmare, and Sue told him to shake it off and go back to bed. Jake was too freaked out though, and he refused to sleep in his bed. After some arguing, they finally allowed Jake to sleep on the sofa in the living room. Next night, Jake still refused to sleep in his room. Sue told him he was being ridiculous and she was determined to prove her point. "Okay, fine," she told him. "I'll sleep in your bed tonight. Nothing will happen, and then you'll have to accept that you simply had a nightmare." Jake was fine with this plan, so long as he didn't have to sleep in there again. He went down the hall to sleep next to his dad, and Sue made herself comfortable in Jake's bed. As Sue was about to drop off to sleep, she also heard something. Then suddenly, the same unseen something lay down behind her in the bed. It was exactly as Jake described it to them the night before. Sue could feel the dent in the mattress, as though another person was in the bed next to her. She jumped out of the bed, flipped on the light, and once again, nothing was there. Nobody slept in Jake's bedroom for a while after that. Not until the family's priest came over to bless the house, and especially to bless Jake's room. After that, the ghostly visitor never again tried to climb into bed with anyone in the Smith family. However, one morning Sue did walk into the living room to discover a woman in a beautiful, full kimono just standing there and staring at her. After a few awkward moments, she quickly faded away into nothingness and vanished, never to be seen again. This is an experience from my childhood that I do not remember, but my mother and grandmother tell me the story like it was yesterday. My parents had me in their early 20s, and they ended up getting divorced when I was not even a year old. I often spent the nights at my grandma's house, my mother's mom, since my mom had little money at the time. When I was about 1 to 2 years old, I would come out of my room and tell everyone how there's a lady that used to stand over my crib at night and watch me sleep. Since I was so little, everyone thought I was just making up stories. It was my imagination, or I was dreaming. This continued on for months, if not a year. Every night I would tell my mom, "Mom, the lady that stands over my crib at night said this and that, blah, blah, blah." One day my mom and grandma were looking through a photo book. As they were flipping through pages, she lands on a photo of my dad's mom. I pointed to her and said, "Mom, that's the lady that stands over my crib at night." I had never met her, and she had died years before I was born. After that, I have experienced seeing my late relatives numerous times. I do not have a gift, nor do I consider myself able to see/communicate with the dead. I believe I have guardian angels that check up on me, and I happen to catch them at the right time. This incident occurred when I was around 3 years old. As with being that young, I don't remember much from that time except for one vivid memory. My family had not long ago moved into a rental property in the suburbs of Melbourne. It was a nice enough house, small but cozy, perfect for a young family. It began on a day during winter when darkness came early, wherein I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching a kids show that I can't remember. I was kind of zoning out when the eerie feeling of being watched flowed over me. A tingle at the back of my neck that made me stiffen and look around in confusion. Everything was normal. I heard my parents cooking dinner in the kitchen, and my older sister was playing on the ground nearby. I physically felt eyes boring into the back of my head, so following my instincts, I turned and looked out the window. The first thing I noticed was that the curtains were opened even though it was pitch black outside, and Mom always closed them when the sun went down. Focusing on what's beyond the glass, my eyes searched the whole darkened front yard. A shiver ran down my spine because somehow I knew there was something out there. I froze and fear shot through to my very core when the blackness moved, and I saw a shape amid the shadows. There was a tall, dark figure lurking under the large tree that stood in the middle of the lawn. This thing looked humanoid, but I couldn't see any details. It was just jet black, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on it when I looked right at it. I couldn't see its face, but I somehow knew it was looking right at me. I had the feeling that whatever this was, it didn't have good intentions. All I remember thinking is bad when I saw it. What was even stranger was that the pale glow from the streetlights left the yard in shadow, but the dark figure cast no shadow. Felt like forever, but it was probably only a few minutes that I stood terrified staring at this thing. My heart was thundering in my chest. I felt like prey being stalked by a predator. Mercifully, my mom's voice broke through my panic as she called us to dinner. Snapping my eyes away from the shadow, I glanced over my shoulder to where my mom was setting the plates on the table. I sighed in relief at the normalcy. I didn't want to look back, but I just had to know if it was still there. So plucking up my courage, I turned back to the window. My eyes widened in shock, though, when I saw that the figure was gone. Like it was never there. When I saw that it was gone, I did what any 3-year-old would do. Shrug it off and go eat my dinner. I honestly thought this was a dream until I was chatting with my mom and asked her if there used to be a tree in the front yard of our old house, and a gray chair in the lounge room. When she told me there was, I was freaked out and told her what I remembered. There were too many similarities to the house, and it's weird that I would remember so much about that incident from being that young. So I figured it had to be a memory.